There is a particular kind of quiet that can only be found in the desert, after the sun has surrendered its hold on the day. It is not simply an absence of sound, but a profound presence of stillness, a deep, velvet silence that seems to absorb the very concept of noise. The sky, a vast and deepening canvas, shifts from brilliant orange to a bruised purple, and finally to an infinite, ink-black expanse studded with cold, distant stars. The mountains that ring the horizon are no longer distinct shapes, but soft, dark cutouts against the glowing afterlight of dusk. This is the Nevada desert at twilight, a landscape of breathtaking emptiness and untouched beauty. In this immense solitude, the air itself changes character. The residual warmth of the desert floor radiates upward, meeting the descending chill of the high desert night, creating a gentle, whispering breeze that carries the faint, clean scent of sagebrush and dry earth. Shadows stretch into impossibly long, fading shapes before merging completely with the gathering darkness. If you stand very still, you can feel the heartbeat of the planet here, a slow, patient rhythm measured in millennia, not minutes. It is a place that feels both ancient and utterly timeless, a perfect keeper of mysteries. It is in landscapes like these, so remote and seemingly forgotten, that secrets often find their home. Far from the crowded cities and the constant hum of human activity, the vast, open spaces become a cloak. The very isolation that makes the desert feel so empty also makes it the ideal sanctuary for things meant to remain unseen and unknown. Truths, both natural and man-made, settle into the dry soil and the craggy rock faces, buried not by shovel, but by sheer distance and the assumption that no one is watching. To the north, hidden within the folds of this solemn terrain, lies a place known more by rumor than by map. Its official designation is a dry, bureaucratic number, but the world has come to know it by another name, whispered in stories and speculated about in late-night conversations: Area 51. From this quiet desert floor, it is invisible, just another part of the mythology of the landscape. But its presence, real or imagined, hangs in the cool air, a subtle suggestion that within this profound peace, something extraordinary is being guarded. Tonight, the silence is absolute. A lone coyote's call echoes from a distant ridge, a brief, mournful note that only serves to deepen the quiet that follows. The stars will slowly overhead, indifferent witnesses to the small dramas of Earth. It is a scene of perfect, calming solitude, the kind that invites deep reflection. Yet, it is precisely here, in this emptiness beneath the glittering cosmos, that one man would eventually emerge from the shadows, carrying a story so incredible, so world-shaking, that it would ripple out from this silent desert and challenge everything we think we know. From this serene, secret-holding desert, a figure emerged into the public eye, not with a fanfare, but with a quiet, startling confidence. His name was Robert Scott Lazar, though the world would come to know him simply as Bob Lazar. In late 1989, he stepped onto a television screen and into the realm of modern myth, bringing with him a claim so specific and so grand it seemed ripped from the pages of science fiction. He stated, plainly and without apparent theatrics, that he had been hired to work on extraterrestrial technology at a hidden facility called S4, nestled in the mountains southwest of the very Area 51 that haunted desert lore. His story was not one of a passive witness, but of an insider. He presented himself as a physicist, a scientist recruited for his unique understanding of propulsion systems. He described a complex of 9 hangars built into the base of a mountain, their doors cunningly designed to look like the natural slopes of the Papoose Dry Lake Range from the outside. Within, he claimed to have seen not one, but 9 disc-shaped craft of undoubtedly non-human origin. His task, he said, was to unravel the principles behind their propulsion, a gravity-based system powered by an element unknown on the periodic table Element 115. The details were technical, precise, and delivered with a calm, matter-of-fact demeanor that was both compelling and deeply unsettling. To give weight to these extraordinary claims, Lazar pointed to his background. He spoke of an education at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology and the California Institute of Technology, hallowed institutions at the pinnacle of scientific learning. He mentioned previous work at the Los Alamos Mess and Physics Facility, a top-tier government lab, where he was listed in a staff directory as a physicist. On the surface, here was a man with the pedigree to be taken seriously, a credentialed scientist making the most sensational disclosure imaginable. It created a powerful narrative, the brilliant insider breaking his silence for the good of humanity. Yet, almost as soon as the story spread, the ground beneath his credentials began to subtly shift. Investigative journalists and skeptics found no records of a Robert Lazar graduating from MIT or Caltech. The institutions themselves had no registration for him. Los Alamos confirmed his employment, but as a contractor for a defense company, and his specific role was murky. The clear, linear path of a top scientist became clouded, replaced by a more ambiguous portrait of a talented electronics enthusiast and self-professed tinkerer with a fascination for jets and propulsion. The controversy did not disprove his story of S4, but it planted a seed of profound mystery about the man himself. Was he a genuine whistleblower whose past had been erased to discredit him, or was he a fabulist weaving a complex tale? What makes Lazar's narrative so enduringly fascinating is this very duality. Before his fateful decision to go public, he was, by many accounts, an ordinary man leading an ordinary life. He ran a photo processing lab in Las Vegas. He owned a car, a notable one, a jet-powered vehicle he had built himself, hinting at a mind obsessed with speed and advanced engineering. He was a person with bills to pay, a daily routine, neighbors. This image of normalcy clashed dramatically with the cosmic scale of his secret. It prompts a quiet, reflective question. What does it look like when someone carrying the weight of the universe's greatest secret takes out the trash or buys groceries? The extraordinary was hidden in the shell of the mundane. This juxtaposition lies at the heart of the intrigue. We are left with a compelling, unresolved character study. A man with a controversial past provides astonishingly detailed testimony about alien spacecraft. The details of his life before the revelation are a puzzle with missing pieces, and the truth of his claims seems to hinge, in part, on which version of his history you believe. But one question rises above the debate over diplomas and employment records, a question that speaks to a very human drama. What internal pressure, what compelling force, could possibly drive a man living a quiet life to step into a storm of ridicule, scrutiny, and potential danger, to share a secret he had sworn to keep? To understand the journey of Bob Lazar, one must first sit for a moment with the concept of a secret of unimaginable magnitude. Imagine knowing a truth so profound it redefines reality itself. A truth about our place in the cosmos, about technology that bends the laws of physics, about a history not written in any earthly book. Now, imagine you are contractually, legally, and morally bound to lock that truth away in a silent chamber within your own mind. You cannot share it with your spouse over a morning coffee. You cannot marvel at it with an old friend. It lives with you, a constant, invisible companion that separates you from the rest of the world by a chasm no one else can see. This is the psychological landscape Lazar described inhabiting. The weight of such knowledge is not a metaphor. It manifests as a palpable pressure. It is the slight hesitation before answering a casual question about your work, the careful editing of your own thoughts before you speak, the isolation that grows even in a crowded room. Every social interaction becomes a performance, a gentle deception by omission. The person you were before the secret begins to feel like a distant memory, replaced by a curated version who must always be on guard, lest a single, unguarded words slip through the careful facade. The mechanism of this silence is the security oath, a solemn pledge wrapped in the stern language of the state. It is more than a promise. It is a legal cage built around information. Lazar spoke of being warned of severe consequences, not just job loss, but criminal prosecution, financial ruin, and the implicit, darker threats that always hover around the world of classified black projects. The oath creates a universe of need to know, where curiosity is a liability and trust is a compartmentalized tool. Your secret is not yours to share. It is property of the most powerful entity imaginable, and you are merely its temporary, silent custodian. Yet, the human mind is not designed for such absolute containment. Secrets, especially those of a wondrous and terrifying nature, yearn for expression. They create an internal friction. On one side, the trained instinct for self-preservation and duty, the voice that whispers to keep your head down and carry the burden. On the other, a growing sense of ethical imperative, a belief that humanity has a right to know, mixed with the simple, human need to be unburdened, to be truly seen and known by those around you. This conflict is a quiet, daily erosion of peace. It turns the secret from a mere piece of information into a psychological tenant that pays no rent, yet demands all your emotional space. We can picture Lazar in his pre-disclosure life, a man moving through the ordinary rhythms of the world. He would get up, perhaps look at the desert mountains in the distance, mountains that hid his incredible truth, and then drive to his photo lab. He would develop film, talk to customers about vacations and family portraits, all while carrying the blueprint of an alien engine in his head. The dissonance must have been staggering. The cosmic and the quotidian existed in him side by side, one a silent scream against the humdrum backdrop of the other. It paints a portrait of a profound loneliness, a man living on an island of his own making, surrounded by a sea of people who could never understand why he seemed, at times, a million miles away. In such a state, silence is not peaceful. It is a heavy, active thing. It requires constant energy to maintain. It builds pressure like water behind a dam, and the mind begins to seek a release valve. The choice to speak out, then, is rarely a simple calculation of risk versus reward. It is often the culmination of a long, internal siege, where the weight of the unspoken truth finally becomes greater than the fear of the consequences. It is the moment the dam, worn down by the relentless pressure, develops its first, inevitable crack. Sometimes, silence becomes heavier than the truth itself. The pressure of a secret builds until it finds a weak point, a moment of fracture. For Bob Lazar, that moment arrived not with a grand epiphany, but likely as a quiet, desperate realization during the ordinary flow of a life he could no longer fully inhabit. The exact trigger remains one of the story's intimate mysteries. Perhaps it was a specific event, a final, stifling security briefing, a dismissive glance from a superior that reduced cosmic wonder to mere compartmentalized data. Or perhaps it was the slow, accumulating weight of years, the gradual understanding that to live the rest of his life in this state of divided consciousness was a fate worse than any official reprisal. The decision to speak was a seed planted in the dark soil of isolation, and by 1989, it had broken through to the light. We can consider the possible motivations that watered that seed. A conscience-driven imperative is a powerful force. The belief that knowledge of an extraterrestrial presence and gravity-defying energy sources belonged not to a secretive cabal, but to all of humanity. This was the whistleblower's noble cause. Yet, intertwined with that could have been more personal currents. A simmering resentment at being controlled, a fear for his own safety within the labyrinthine world of black projects, or even a simple, profound exhaustion from the performance of normalcy. It is in the blend of these motives, the altruistic and the personal, that we find the most human portrait of a choice that was anything but simple. The risks he contemplated were not abstract. Speaking out against the edifice of government secrecy, especially concerning a facility like S4, was to invite a storm. The consequences were layered. At the most immediate level was the legal threat, prosecution for breach of security oaths, which could mean decades in prison and financial obliteration. Then came the professional and social death, becoming a pariah, labeled a liar or a traitor, unemployable in any field that valued discretion. But lurking behind these was the more ominous, unspoken tier of risk, the kind of pressure that could be applied off the books, the subtle threats to one's freedom, safety, and sanity that are the hallmark of stories dealing with the deepest state secrets. To step forward was to gamble everything. The era itself provided a unique context. The year was 1989. The Cold War was entering its final thaw, but a deep-seated culture of government secrecy, born of decades of nuclear and espionage paranoia, remained firmly entrenched. In the world of UFOs, the cultural conversation was shifting. The rigid official dismissals of the past were being met with growing public skepticism. Investigative journalists and dedicated researchers were gaining traction, and the public appetite for disclosure was growing. Lazar's decision did not occur in a vacuum. It landed on a cultural landscape that was, for the first time in a long while, perhaps fertile enough to let such a radical story take root, rather than instantly dismissing it. The first, tentative step across the line was not a shout, but a whisper. It began with a cautious, anonymous contact. According to the narrative, Lazar reached out to someone he believed could handle the story with seriousness. Investigative journalist George Knapp of Las Vegas television station KLAS. Those initial conversations were likely cloaked in extreme paranoia. Pay phones, coded language, meetings in nondescript locations. For Lazar, it was a dance of testing the waters, of gauging whether his incredible truth would be met with laughter or investigation. For Knapp, it was the beginning of a puzzle that would consume decades of his life. The preparations were meticulous, a careful choreography designed to protect the source while capturing the story. This period, the days and weeks leading up to the taping of that first interview, must have been an emotional purgatory for Lazar. Every familiar corner of his life now held a potential threat. The desert he drove through was no longer just a landscape, it was a watched space. His past was a file he imagined being scrutinized. The act of preparing his testimony forced him to relive the secrets, to structure the chaos of his experience into a coherent narrative he could present to the world. It was a final, intense rehearsal before stepping onto a stage from which there would be no exit. The calm of the desert night outside his windows stood in stark contrast to the tempest of anxiety and resolve building within. Finally, the moment arrived. The cameras were set, the reporter was ready, and Bob Lazar had to choose, to step back into the shadows of his sworn silence, or to step forward into the glare. He had weighed the conscience against the consequence, the duty to humanity against the duty to his oath. The dam of silence he had maintained for so long was at its breaking point. There is a stillness that comes just before a profound action, a final, trembling breath before the leap. Once words are spoken, they cannot be taken back. Bob Lazar was about to cross a line from which there was no return. On November 10th, 1989, the secret Bob Lazar had carried for so long finally found its voice. But it was a voice deliberately obscured, filtered through a device that rendered it a flat, robotic monotone. Sitting in a shadow so deep it swallowed his features, the man known to the public only as Dennis began to speak to investigative reporter George Knapp on KLAS TV. The visual was stark and powerfully symbolic. A silhouette of a man, a shadow figure literally emerging from the shadows to tell a story too sensitive for the light. This was not a grand press conference. It was a clandestine revelation, setting the tone for everything that would follow. A tale of mystery presented as a mystery itself. The atmosphere of that interview was thick with a palpable tension, a blend of caution and revelation. Knapp, serving as a steady, credible conduit, asked probing yet respectful questions. Dennis, careful and measured in his distorted responses, outlined the incredible framework of his story. He described being hired through a defense contractor to work at a site called S4 near Area 51. He spoke of reviewing briefings that outlined the extraterrestrial origin of the craft he would study, a history of interaction spanning millennia. And he detailed the 9 disc-shaped vehicles, one of which he was tasked to reverse engineer, focusing on its gravity propulsion system powered by a stable isotope of element 115. The technical specificity, delivered in that eerie, disguised voice, made the interview feel less like a UFO tale and more like a classified briefing leaked into the living rooms of Las Vegas. The public reaction to this shadowy broadcast was immediate and electric. Within the UFO community, it was a seismic event. Here was not a fuzzy photograph or a distant light in the sky, but a first-hand account from a purported insider, providing names, locations, and physics. The conversation exploded from niche circles into broader media buzz. Talk radio buzzed with callers. Newspapers picked up the strange local story of Dennis. The very method of the disclosure, the secrecy, the voice disguise, lent it an air of credibility. It suggested a man in genuine fear, someone with something real to lose, which made his claims feel dangerously plausible rather than fantastical. As viewers absorbed the details, the pacing of the narrative invited them to sit with each astonishing claim. The description of the S4 facility, built into a mountain with doors that blended into the terrain, painted a clear picture of clandestine ingenuity. The discussion of the craft's reactor, a sphere the size of a basketball, and its amplifiers that created a gravitational distortion, offered tangible, if bewildering, mechanics. Knapp's calm, journalistic demeanor allowed these ideas to land without sensationalism, giving the audience space to process the magnitude of what was being suggested, that the most profound scientific discovery in human history was already being studied in a hidden desert base. Yet, alongside the wonder, credibility questions arose with almost equal speed. Skeptics and journalists immediately began probing the holes in the Dennis persona. Why the extreme secrecy if his story was true? Could the technical details, which sounded convincing to laypersons, stand up to scrutiny from top physicists? The very lack of a face, a name, or verifiable credentials became a point of contention. The interview created 2 parallel tracks of public discourse, one captivated by the detailed testimony, the other deeply suspicious of its anonymous source. This duality would become the defining feature of the Lazar saga, a constant pull between the compelling "what if" and the critical "show me." The interview concluded, but the story it unleashed was only beginning. Dennis had laid down a gauntlet of incredible claims. The next logical, inevitable step was a demand for proof of identity, for the man behind the mask to stand accountable for his words. The shadowy figure had successfully injected a potent story into the world's bloodstream, but the anonymity that protected him also limited his impact. To truly shake the world, he would have to emerge fully. The pressure was now building, not just on the institutions he accused, but on Dennis himself. He had sparked a fire with his words, and to keep it alive, he would have to step closer to the heat. The world had heard his voice, but soon they would see his face, and nothing would ever be the same. The silhouette had told its story. Now, the man would have to stand behind it, to trade the safety of shadows for the unforgiving light of public scrutiny. The first interview was the crack in the dam. What followed would be the flood. The journey to the S4 facility, as described by Bob Lazar, was an exercise in disorientation and enforced secrecy, a ritual designed to strip away any sense of location or agency from those it transported. According to his account, it did not begin with a direct drive into the desert. but with a rendezvous at a nondescript location near the Nevada test site. From there, personnel were loaded into a windowless, unmarked bus, its interior deliberately plain and revealing nothing of the outside world. The hum of the engine and the gentle sway of the vehicle became the only sensory inputs, a cocoon of sound and motion that severed the travelers from the familiar flow of time and space. Security was not a single checkpoint, but a layered, immersive protocol. Identification was scrutinized not once, but multiple times by armed, unsmiling guards whose authority seemed absolute. There were no casual conversations, no explanations offered. The process communicated a single, clear message. You are entering a realm where normal rules do not apply, and your presence is a temporary, conditional privilege. A deep, respectful silence often fell among the passengers, each person alone with their thoughts as the vehicle carried them further into the unknown. Outside the sealed bus, the landscape itself was a partner in secrecy. The route, Lazar suggested, wound through areas of the Nevada desert that were deliberately remote, far from public roads or casual observation. Through the front windshield, which the drivers alone could see, would have stretched an endless expanse of dusty basins and rugged, sun-bleached mountain ranges. The heat, even at night, would radiate from the ancient stone and sand, creating shimmering mirages at the edges of vision. This was a land that held its secrets close, a vast, natural vault that asked no questions and offered no landmarks to the uninitiated. The tension during these journeys was a tangible presence, a low-frequency hum in the air that matched the drone of the tires on the gravel road. It was the anxiety of crossing an invisible boundary, of leaving the world of the known behind. For Lazar, this tension would have been mixed with a scientist's intense curiosity. Each trip was a return to the epicenter of an unbelievable reality. He described a feeling of surreal duality, the mundane act of a bus ride juxtaposed against the extraordinary destination that awaited. The closer they got, the more the everyday world seemed to fade, like a distant dream. A profound sense of isolation was the final layer of the journey. As the bus navigated the desolate terrain, any sign of human civilization, a distant power line, an old mining road, would have completely fallen away. The feeling was of traveling not just across space, but into a different dimension of reality, one where the concerns of ordinary life held no sway. The sheer scale of the empty desert, under a dome of stars impossibly bright in the thin, clean air, created a feeling of otherworldliness even before arriving at the facility. It was a landscape that prepared the mind for the extraordinary. The journey's culmination was never announced. There was no sign, no sudden cluster of buildings. Instead, the bus would eventually slow and turn onto what appeared to be nothing more than a particularly barren stretch of desert floor, perhaps near the base of the Papoose Range. The anticipation in the vehicle would peak in a collective, unspoken silence. Then, a structure, cunningly camouflaged to look like the natural slope of the mountain, would begin its silent, mechanical operation. The desert itself seemed to move, to open, and then, rising from the desert floor, structures that shouldn't exist came into view. Passing through those ingeniously camouflaged doors was like stepping through a portal. The harsh, open expanse of the desert, with its scouring wind and boundless sky, was instantly replaced by an environment of profound human control. According to Lazar's descriptions, the transition was abrupt, from the ancient, sun-baked world outside to a sterile, artificial realm carved deep into the living rock of the mountain. The air changed first. It was cool, dry, and carried the faint, clean scent of filtration systems and ozone, a marked contrast to the sagebrush and dust. The interior of S4, as he portrayed it, was a masterpiece of clandestine engineering. The main artery was a long, broad corridor, its scale hinting at the substantial operations it served. The walls and high ceiling were finished in a stark, industrial white, or a dull, non-reflective gray, illuminated not by traditional bulbs, but by the diffuse, shadowless glow of long fluorescent tubes recessed into the ceiling. The light was bright, clinical, and utterly constant, banishing any natural sense of day or night. The floor, likely polished concrete or sealed rock, echoed with the precise, isolated sounds of footsteps and the distant, mechanical hum of hidden infrastructure. This was a high-tech environment, but one of a specific, utilitarian kind. Conduits and pipes, painted in coded colors, ran along the upper walls or within exposed channels. Security cameras, their lenses dark and unblinking, watched every angle from where the walls met the ceiling. The atmosphere was one of intense, quiet efficiency. Personnel moved with purpose but without haste, their interactions minimal and professional. Conversations were low, technical, and devoid of casual chatter. The overwhelming impression was of a place where curiosity was secondary to procedure, and where the extraordinary had been rendered routine through rigid protocol. Navigating this interior required passage through multiple security checkpoints, each more restrictive than the last. Lazar described stations where keycards, codes, and sometimes biometric scans were required, not once, but in sequence. Certain doors would only unlock after a preceding one had sealed shut, creating a series of airtight compartments, both physically and informationally. This airlock principle extended to knowledge itself. You only gained access to the next section if your clearance specifically allowed it. The facility was a physical manifestation of the need-to-know doctrine, a maze designed to keep the whole picture fragmented among its inhabitants. The architectural genius of S4 lay in its dual purpose, to house the impossible while pretending it did not exist. The hangar bays themselves were the facility's great secret. Lazar stated there were 9 of them, massive doors set into the side of the excavated mountain. From the outside, as the doors closed, they were designed to perfectly mimic the natural geology, a feat of engineering that spoke to a near-paranoid level of precaution. Inside, these bays were vast, cathedral-like spaces, their ceilings soaring high enough to accommodate the disc-shaped craft. The sense of scale within these hangars was deliberately awe-inspiring, meant to humble the human engineers who worked there. The pacing of a first visit to such a place would have been a slow absorption of surreal details. The quiet was profound, broken only by the low hum of environmental systems. The sterile light reflected off seamless surfaces. Every corner was clean, every tool in its place. It felt less like a workshop and more like a museum or a laboratory for artifacts of an unknown civilization. The calm, ordered environment stood in stark, almost jarring contrast to the mind-bending purpose it served. It was a space that demanded a quiet mind, where the enormity of what was housed there could only be grasped in the silent moments between instructions. Walking those bright, empty corridors, a person would feel the weight of the mountain above them and the mystery sealed within the hangar bays to the side. The hallway was just a connector, a neutral space. But the sealed doors along its length hummed with potential, guarding the heart of the secret. These empty corridors were just the beginning. What waited in the hangars would challenge everything we thought we knew. Within the vast, silent hangars of S4, the central objects of study rested on simple, 3-legged landing gear. According to Bob Lazar's testimony, these were the artifacts that rendered the sterile facility extraordinary, the craft. They were not monstrous in size, but their presence dominated the space. He described them as classic disc-shaped vehicles, what the world would call flying saucers, approximately 40 to 50 feet in diameter. Their color was a muted, non-reflective metallic gray, like a dull pewter or the hue of a weathered gunmetal, absorbing rather than reflecting the bright hangar lights. The most immediately striking feature, Lazar noted, was their seamless construction. As one approached, the eye searched for the telltale signs of human manufacturing: rivets, weld lines, panel seams, or bolt heads. It found none. The hull appeared to be crafted from a single, continuous piece of material, curved in elegant, flowing lines from the slightly domed upper section to the gently rounded underside. There were no sharp edges, no protruding elements. The surface was smooth to the touch, Lazar claimed, but not like polished steel. It had a unique, almost warm texture, unlike any conventional aircraft alloy. It was a perfect, unbroken skin. This material possessed unusual properties that defied standard physics. Lazar described it as incredibly resilient and heavy. Yet when parts of the craft were activated, sections of the hull itself seemed to become transparent or to channel light in strange ways. The metal was impervious to conventional tools. Attempts to drill or cut into it with standard equipment reportedly failed. It was a substance that seemed to obey a different set of rules, a physical embodiment of the technological gulf between its makers and its human observers. The craft didn't just house advanced technology, it was, in its very substance, advanced technology. The underside of the disk featured what Lazar identified as the gravitational propulsion system. He described 3 gravitational amplifiers, arranged in a triangular formation, which would channel and direct the force generated by the reactor. Near the center was a smaller, 4th aperture, which may have served a different navigational purpose. When the craft was operational, he claimed, these areas would glow with a strange, intense light, and the air around them would distort visibly, warping the very space the vehicle occupied. The design was elegant in its simplicity, a solution to interstellar travel that bypassed rockets and wings entirely. Gaining entry to the interior was an event in itself. Lazar recounted that a section of the lower hull would, without visible seam or hinge, simply become an opening, a doorway that seemed to phase into existence. Inside, the environment was compact and functional. The atmosphere was cool and carried a distinct, unfamiliar odor that he struggled to describe, sometimes likening it to burnt ozone or a stale, metallic scent. The lighting was indirect, emanating from the walls and ceiling themselves, casting a soft, uniform glow. The layout felt alien not in a grotesque way, but in its efficient, minimalist disregard for human convention. The cockpit or control area was particularly revealing. The seats, Lazar observed, were small, too small for an average adult human. They were simple in design, suggesting the operators were of a slight, possibly smaller stature. The control interfaces were not a jungle of switches, dials, or screens as one might find in a human aircraft. Instead, he described smooth panels and what appeared to be hand placement areas, implying a control system based on touch, biofeedback, or thought. There were no visible wiring harnesses, no recognizable computer systems. The technology was so integrated it was virtually invisible, a stark contrast to the bulky electronics of late 1980s Earth. At the heart of the craft, accessible from a small chamber near the center, was the power source, the reactor. Lazar described it as a spherical object, roughly the size of a basketball. Within it, he claimed, was the key, element 115, a stable, super-heavy substance not found on Earth. This element, he explained, served a dual purpose. Its gravitational field was the fuel for the propulsion system, and it also, when bombarded with protons, would produce antimatter for an incredible energy yield. The reactor area was sealed and heavily shielded, the most protected and mysterious part of the entire vehicle, the tiny sun around which the entire craft's reality orbited. To stand before such an object, as Lazar claims to have done, would be an experience of profound cognitive dissonance. Every detail, from the seamless hull to the child-sized seats, from the gravity amplifiers to the unknown element reactor, whispered the same truth. This was no experimental aircraft from a rival nation, no black-budget prototype pushed to its limits. The design philosophy, the material science, the physics it allegedly employed, all of it pointed away from Earth, toward a lineage of engineering divorced from human history. This was no human creation. Every detail whispered of origins beyond our world. At the very core of Bob Lazar's technical claims lies a substance so pivotal it serves as both the literal and conceptual fuel for his entire story. He called it Element 115. In the late 1980s, when Lazar first spoke of it publicly, this name referred to a hypothetical, undiscovered slot on the periodic table, a super-heavy element that scientists theorized might exist, but had no means to create or contain. Lazar, however, didn't speak of it as a theory. He described it as a tangible, stable metal, the key technological component of the alien craft he claimed to have worked on. His description of its properties ventured deep into the realms of speculative physics. Lazar asserted that this particular isotope of element 115 was stable, meaning it did not rapidly decay like other human-made super-heavy elements. Its most crucial property, he claimed, was its gravitational signature. According to him, the atomic structure of element 115 produced its own gravitational field or gravity wave, a concept that, if true, would upend conventional understanding. In the craft's reactor, this material was used as a target. When bombarded with protons, a small portion of the 115 would be converted into element 116, which would immediately decay and, in the process, release antimatter. This antimatter annihilation would then produce an enormous amount of energy to power the craft's systems. But the more mind-bending application was in propulsion. Lazar described the craft's reactor as being able to amplify and focus the inherent gravitational wave produced by the element 115 fuel. This amplified gravity wave could then be directed through the 3 gravitational amplifiers on the underside of the craft. By manipulating this focused gravitational field, the vehicle could essentially pull itself toward a destination, warping space-time in its immediate vicinity rather than pushing against air or expelling thrust like a rocket. It was a concept of movement that treated gravity not as a fixed force, but as a manipulable field, a fundamental shift in thinking. The timeline of this claim creates one of the most enduring points of curiosity in the entire saga. Bob Lazar spoke publicly and in specific detail about element 115 in 1989. At that time, it was pure speculation on the furthest edges of nuclear physics. Then, in 2003, a team of Russian and American scientists successfully synthesized a few atoms of element 115 for the first time in a laboratory. They named it moscovium. The synthesized version was highly unstable, lasting only fractions of a second before decaying, which differs from Lazar's description of a stable, workable fuel. Yet, the coincidence is striking. He named a specific, undiscovered element 14 years before science confirmed it could exist, even in a fleeting form. A balanced view of this fact requires calm consideration from 2 angles. From one perspective, it could be seen as a remarkable piece of prescient knowledge. How would a man with supposedly fabricated credentials know to hinge his entire story on a specific, then unknown element that would later be discovered? From the skeptical angle, it could be a very clever, educated guess. The periodic table follows a predictable structure, and physicists in the 1980s were actively theorizing about the island of stability, where super-heavy elements like 115 might exist. A savvy storyteller could have incorporated this cutting-edge speculation to lend scientific credence to a fictional tale. The true nature of this detail remains shrouded in the same mystery that envelopes the entire story. It is a piece of a puzzle that fits a little too neatly for some, and not neatly enough for others. It forces a lingering question that hangs in the air long after the simpler explanations have been exhausted, a question that taps directly into the human fascination with foreknowledge and hidden truth. If Lazar was lying, how did he know about an element that wouldn't exist for another 14 years? The true wonder of Bob Lazar's story lies not just in the existence of a strange craft, but in the elegant, almost magical method by which he claimed it moved. Forget jet engines, roaring rockets, or spinning propellers. The propulsion he described was a silent manipulation of the most fundamental force in the universe, gravity. Imagine gravity not as a constant, unmovable pull, but as a fabric, a sheet of flexible space-time upon which all objects rest. Conventional travel is like crawling across this sheet. The craft Lazar described, however, had the ability to gently pinch and pull the fabric itself, bringing its destination closer to it. This process, as he outlined it, began with the Element 115 reactor. The reactor's role was to generate and amplify a controllable gravitational wave, a ripple in that fabric of space-time. Think of dropping a single, powerful pebble into a still pond. The wave radiates outward. Now, imagine you could shape that wave, focus it into a beam, and point it in a specific direction. That focused gravity wave, Lazar claimed, was then channeled to the 3 gravity amplifiers on the underside of the craft, arranged in a triangle. By carefully modulating the output of these 3 amplifiers, the craft could create a directed gravitational field. It wouldn't fly in the traditional sense of pushing against air. Instead, it would essentially create a localized gravity hill in front of it and a gravity valley behind it. The craft would then fall forward along the warped space it had just created. This manipulation would also have a profound side effect. By bending space-time around the vehicle, it would effectively isolate the craft and its occupants from the inertial forces of rapid acceleration and sharp turns, explaining the sudden, 90-degree maneuvers described in so many UFO sightings. The beauty of this concept, even as speculation, is its clean break from the explosive, fuel-burning methods humanity has always relied upon. It suggests a technology of harmony with physics, not a battle against it. To harness gravity is to hold the master key to movement in the cosmos. It renders the vacuum of space not an obstacle, but a highway. The distances between stars, so vast they crush the human imagination, suddenly become negotiable not by traveling faster through space, but by subtly changing the nature of space itself around the traveler. If true, this technology would revolutionize everything we know about physics and travel. When Bob Lazar shed his dentist's pseudonym and stepped fully into the public eye, his story detonated not with a quiet whisper, but with a cultural shockwave. The media frenzy was immediate and intense. Local Las Vegas news was quickly eclipsed by national tabloids, talk radio programs, and eventually, major television networks. The narrative was irresistible. An ordinary-looking man from the desert calmly describing alien spacecraft in a secret government base. He was no longer a shadowy voice. He was a person with a face, a demeanor, and an astonishingly detailed tale. The spotlight, harsh and unforgiving, locked onto him. Public reaction fractured dramatically along familiar fault lines. Within the UFO and paranormal community, the response was electric, a surge of validation. Here, at last, was the smoking gun insider testimony they had been waiting for, a scientist, not a farmer, providing technical specifics that matched decades of sighting reports. Lazar was hailed as a hero, a modern-day Prometheus risking everything to bring the fire of cosmic truth to humanity. Conferences buzzed with analysis of his every word. His claims became the new benchmark for serious discussion. Conversely, the mainstream scientific and academic establishment responded with near-universal dismissal and often open ridicule. Without verifiable credentials or physical evidence, Lazar's story was labeled fantasy, a hoax, or the delusion of a misguided individual. Respected physicists publicly dismantled the feasibility of his gravity propulsion claims based on known science. Major newspapers often relegated coverage to the weird news sections, framing it as entertainment rather than a legitimate disclosure. This schism created 2 parallel conversations, one celebrating a revelation, the other debunking a fraud. For the general public, detached from either camp, the story became a source of pure, captivating fascination. It was the perfect cocktail of conspiracy, sci-fi wonder, and human drama. It dominated water-cooler conversations and family dinners. Could it be true? The very question was thrilling. Lazar found himself fielding a deluge of interview requests, from late-night radio shows to daytime talk programs. Each appearance dissected his claims, his background, and his demeanor, feeding the public's hunger for more pieces of the puzzle. This period cast Lazar in a new, relentless role, the public figure. His life was no longer his own. His calm, understated delivery was analyzed for signs of deception. His past was picked apart by strangers. He was simultaneously a savior to some and a laughingstock to others, a man trying to explain the cosmos while navigating a sudden hurricane of fame and infamy. The quiet desert existence he had known was gone, replaced by a storm of flashbulbs, probing questions, and polarized opinions. The energy of this reaction was a double-edged sword. The attention validated the importance of his story, but it also painted a target on his back. For every supporter who sent a letter of thanks, there seemed to be a skeptic writing a scathing critique. The noise was deafening, and in the tumult, as the public debate raged in newspapers and on airwaves, other, quieter reactions were taking shape far from the spotlight. But while some celebrated his courage, others were plotting to destroy his credibility. As the initial media storm began to settle, the focus of the investigation into Bob Lazar sharpened from what he said to who he was. His credibility hinged on his claimed background as a physicist educated at two of the world's most prestigious institutions, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology and the California Institute of Technology. This educational pedigree was the bedrock of his identity as a qualified insider. Investigative journalists, led prominently by nuclear physicist and UFO researcher Stanton Friedman, began the straightforward task of verification. What they found, or rather, what they didn't find, became the central, enduring mystery of the entire case. The findings were starkly negative. Both MIT and Caltech conducted searches of their records. No transcripts, no registration documents, no yearbook photos, and no degree certifications for a Robert Lazar or Bob Lazar were found. Classmates and professors who should have overlapped with his claimed attendance had no memory of him. For skeptics, this was case-closed evidence of fabrication. It painted a picture of a man who had inflated his resume to cosmic proportions to lend weight to a fantastical story. How could someone work on the most sensitive project imaginable, they argued, with such easily disprovable lies on his record? Lazar's explanation for this absence was, in itself, a staggering claim. He asserted that his educational and employment records had been systematically erased or altered by government entities as part of a scrubbing operation to discredit him after he went public. He suggested that his file at Los Alamos, where he was listed in a directory, was a planted artifact, and that his true history had been carefully removed from the official record. This wasn't just a case of lost paperwork. It was an allegation of an active, shadowy campaign to make him appear to be a fraud, thereby neutralizing his testimony. Investigators did uncover some verifiable educational history, but it complicated rather than clarified the picture. Records from Pierce College, a community college in Los Angeles, confirmed Lazar's attendance in electronics courses. This proved he had an interest and aptitude in technical subjects, but it fell astronomically short of an MIT/Caltech physics pedigree. For critics, the Pierce College records were the real background, and the elite university claims were the fiction. For believers, they were simply the surviving fragments of a past that had been only partially erased. The Stanton Friedman investigation became a key reference point. Friedman, a meticulous researcher, published a detailed report cataloging the missing records and inconsistencies. He concluded that Lazar had fabricated his credentials. Yet, even within this conclusion, curious questions wiggled free. Why would someone invent a background so easily checked? If he was a clever hoaxer, wouldn't he choose less prominent, less verifiable schools? The very brazenness of the claimed credentials seemed either foolish or indicative of something else, perhaps a belief that the records would be there because they once were. Presenting both sides requires a calm suspension of final judgment. The skeptic's view is clean, logical, and rooted in documentable reality. No records exist, therefore the claims are false. The believer's view is more complex, weaving a conspiracy within the conspiracy. The records were erased because his story is true, and erasing them is the standard playbook for silencing whistleblowers. Both narratives are internally consistent, yet they are mutually exclusive. You are asked to choose not just what you believe about UFOs, but what you believe about the power and reach of secret-keeping institutions. This leaves us with a profound and unsettling pair of possibilities, two different kinds of truth. In one, Bob Lazar is a man who constructed an elaborate lie, basing it on a fictional past at famous schools, a fascinating case of a monumental deception. In the other, he is a man telling a profound truth, whose very identity has been systematically undone by unseen forces to make him look like a liar. The mystery of the missing credentials is more than a fact-checking exercise. It is the core riddle. Either Lazar's past was erased by shadowy forces, or it never existed at all. Which truth is more unsettling? Beyond the war of words in the media, Bob Lazar described experiencing a more tangible and personal form of backlash, a quiet, systematic unraveling of the life he had built. The professional consequences were the first and most direct blows. Almost immediately after going public, his employment prospects evaporated. The photolab business he owned became a subject of scrutiny, and, he suggested, external pressure. Contracts dried up. In a world where he was now either a notorious hoaxer or a dangerous whistleblower, no conventional business or scientific institution would risk association with him. The physicist and entrepreneur became virtually unemployable. Financial pressures began to mount with a quiet, crushing inevitability. Legal fees for navigating the aftermath of his disclosures, combined with the loss of steady income, created a strain that extended into every corner of his personal life. The cost of telling his story was measured not just in public ridicule, but in dwindling bank accounts and the anxiety of providing for himself and his loved ones under the glare of notoriety. The freedom that comes from financial stability was stripped away, replaced by a precariousness that made every day a challenge. This external pressure inevitably seeped into his personal relationships. The strain of constant media attention, legal worries, and financial stress tested bonds with family and friends. Some relationships fractured under the weight of disbelief or fear. Others were strained by the sheer, all-consuming nature of the controversy. Lazar described becoming isolated, not by choice, but by circumstance. The man who had stepped forward to connect with humanity found himself, in many ways, more separated from it than ever before, living inside a story that few could truly comprehend or share. Lazar and those close to him reported experiences that suggested a more active, ominous form of harassment. There were accounts of strange, repetitive phone calls with only silence on the line. Unmarked vehicles were said to be seen parked near his home or business for extended periods. The sense of being constantly watched, of a pervasive, uninvited scrutiny, became a part of daily life. These experiences, whether coincidental or intentional, fostered a climate of paranoia and unease, reinforcing the idea that powerful entities were displeased with his decision to speak. The social isolation was perhaps the most profound erosion. In his former community, he was now a marked man, a figure of either awe or suspicion. The simple, anonymous interactions of daily life were replaced by stares, whispers, and avoidance. Trust became a rare commodity. This created a psychological feedback loop. The more his story was dismissed publicly, the more isolated he became, and the more isolated he became, the easier it was to dismiss him as a marginalized figure. He was caught in a cycle where the act of revealing his secret guaranteed he would never again have a place in the ordinary, secretless world. The cumulative effect was a gradual dismantling of normalcy. Piece by piece, the pillars of a stable life, a career, financial security, private relationships, and social trust, were weakened or removed. From the outside, this could be seen as the predictable fallout of making outrageous claims. From Lazar's perspective, as he described it, it felt like a targeted demolition. It prompts a reflective, empathetic question about the nature of such consequences. Were these the natural results of a ruined reputation, the chaotic fallout of a media storm? Or were they a coordinated effort, a silent punishment for a man who broke the ultimate secrecy oath? Piece by piece, the life he knew was being dismantled. Was it punishment, or was it the price of speaking forbidden truths? In the cacophonous aftermath of Bob Lazar's revelations, with media shouting questions and the public fiercely debating, one entity maintained a profound and consistent quiet: the United States government. There was no press conference, no official statement from the Pentagon or the Department of Energy regarding the specific claims about S-4, alien craft, or Element 115. No spokesperson stepped forward to label Lazar a fraud or to acknowledge an investigation. The official response, in effect, was a resonant, deliberate silence. This non-response became, in itself, one of the most compelling and mysterious aspects of the entire saga. This approach is a well-honed tool in the secrecy playbook, often formalized as a policy of neither confirm nor deny, or NCND. By refusing to engage with the specifics of Lazar's story, authorities neither legitimized it with a denial nor validated it with a confirmation. They simply allowed it to exist in the realm of public speculation, untethered from any official anchor point. This strategy effectively walls off classified information. Even a denial can sometimes reveal, by omission or context, what is actually true. Total silence gives away nothing. A particular point of curiosity arose from the lack of legal action. Lazar had publicly confessed to violating multiple security oaths by disclosing what he claimed was classified information about a top-secret facility. If his story was a complete fabrication, as skeptics asserted, then he had falsely claimed access to national secrets, an action that could itself be considered a crime, or at the very least, grounds for a swift and very public prosecution for fraud or making false statements. Yet, no charges were ever filed. The authorities who should have been most outraged by his breach, real or imagined, took no visible legal steps against him. This inaction invites quiet speculation. From one perspective, prosecuting Lazar would have forced the government into a legal discovery process, potentially requiring them to reveal information about S-4 or Area 51 in a court setting to prove his claims false, a risk they would never take. From another, letting a liar go unpunished might seem like an odd choice, unless his narrative was considered harmless or, perhaps, useful in some obscure way. The silence and lack of prosecution could be interpreted as either the careful maneuvering of an entity with much to hide, or the prudent disregard of an entity confronted with a pointless fiction. The strategic value of this silence is immense. It maintains the integrity of classified programs by offering no chink in the armor for investigators to pry at. It also cultivates plausible deniability, the ability to later claim no knowledge or involvement regardless of the truth. Most powerfully, it transfers the burden of proof entirely onto the whistleblower. Without an official adversary to debate, Lazar was left fighting a shadow, his claims bouncing off the flat, impenetrable wall of state secrecy. This official quiet, stretching over decades, does more than just withhold information. It shapes the story around it. It becomes a blank canvas onto which every fear, hope, and theory can be projected. The absence of a denial is not proof, but it feeds a deep-seated human intuition that powerful silence often guards powerful truths. It turns the government's non-response into an active character in the narrative, a passive yet omnipresent force whose refusal to speak becomes a form of communication all its own. Sometimes what isn't said speaks louder than any denial. In his quest to establish credibility, Bob Lazar voluntarily submitted to multiple polygraph examinations, a move often seen as a gambit for truth-tellers. The most famous of these was conducted in 1990 by former police polygraph examiner Edward Gelb. The test was designed around the core of Lazar's story. He was asked specific, critical questions. Did you work at a secret installation called S4? Did you see an alien spacecraft at that location? Did you see alien bodies? According to the examiner's analysis, Lazar showed no physiological signs of deception. His heart rate, blood pressure, respiration, and perspiration remained consistent with truth-telling. Gelb concluded that Lazar was being truthful about his experiences. These results were quickly embraced by supporters as compelling evidence. A respected examiner, using standard methodology, had found no indication of lying about the central, fantastic claims. For many, this was a significant data point in Lazar's favor. How could someone, the reasoning went, pass such a direct interrogation about such bizarre events if they were fabricating them? The test suggested a man who was internally consistent and believed deeply in the reality of what he was describing. They added a layer of scientific-looking validation to a story that otherwise lacked physical proof. However, the polygraph, or lie detector, is a tool shrouded in its own controversy within the scientific and legal communities. Its fundamental limitation is well known. It does not detect lies, but rather measures physiological arousal, stress, anxiety, nervousness that may be associated with deception. A practiced liar or a psychopath who feels no anxiety can potentially beat the machine. Conversely, an innocent person who is highly nervous or believes a false memory to be true may show deceptive readings. Most U.S. courts do not admit polygraph results as evidence due to their unreliability. This context is crucial for a balanced understanding. Skeptics of Lazar therefore approach the polygraph results from this angle. They argue that Lazar, whether a hoaxer or a sincere believer in his own constructed narrative, would be expected to pass. If he had meticulously crafted and internalized his story, telling it would not trigger the physiological panic of a spontaneous lie. The test would merely confirm his subjective belief, not the objective truth of his claims. Furthermore, critics point out that polygraph examiners can be influenced by their own biases or the framing of questions, and that no test is infallible. The specific questions asked are also pivotal. The test focused on Lazar's personal experiences and perceptions, what he saw and where he worked. It did not and could not test the objective reality of alien technology or the existence of S4. It only tested whether Lazar believed he had experienced these things. This is a subtle but monumental distinction. The polygraph is a window into the subject's mind, not into external reality. Expert opinions on the results thus split along predictable lines. Those who find the passing grades meaningful, and those who dismiss them as irrelevant to the factual verification of the story. This leaves us with an intriguing, nuanced piece of the puzzle. The polygraph examinations add a layer of complexity rather than providing clear resolution. They introduce the human mind itself as a variable. The results suggest that Bob Lazar was not cynically reciting a script he knew to be false. They point toward a man convinced of his own memories. Yet, conviction is not proof. A person can be utterly sincere and still be mistaken, or can have constructed a personal truth so robust it passes the most intimate of physiological scrutinies. The machine said he believed what he was saying. But belief and truth aren't always the same thing. Beyond his solo testimony, Bob Lazar introduced a remarkable element of shared experience into his story, the Wednesday night excursions. According to his account, he knew not only what was hidden at S4, but when it would briefly reveal itself. He claimed that test flights of the advanced craft were scheduled, with a strange regularity, for Wednesday evenings. Unable to contain the wonder alone, and perhaps seeking to create credible witnesses, he began taking a select group of friends on a clandestine pilgrimage into the desert to watch the skies. The journey itself was an adventure, a departure from the mundane world into a landscape of expectation. The group would pile into a car in Las Vegas, the city's neon glow fading in the rearview mirror as they headed north on the long, lonely stretch of Highway 375, later dubbed the Extraterrestrial Highway. The mood was a mix of giddy excitement and focused seriousness. Conversations would ebb and flow, often returning to the same, burning question: would they see it tonight? As civilization receded, the vast, empty darkness of the Nevada test site territory enveloped them, a tangible reminder they were entering forbidden space. Lazar guided them to a specific, remote vantage point, a place he knew from his alleged commuting days. It was a barren rise in the desert, offering a clear, panoramic view across a vast basin toward the forbidding Papoose mountain range and the restricted airspace of Area 51. The location was perfect for observation while remaining at a safe, legal distance. They would park, kill the engine and headlights, and step out into the profound silence of the desert night. The transition was always startling, from the hum of the road to an absolute quiet, so deep it felt like a physical presence. Here, the desert night revealed its true character. With no light pollution for miles, the sky was a breathtaking tapestry. The Milky Way streaked across the dome of the heavens in a dense, luminous river of stars. The air was crisp and cool, carrying the faint, clean scent of sage. The only sounds were the whisper of a gentle wind over the hard-packed earth and the distant, lonely call of a coyote. The group would settle in, their eyes slowly adjusting to the starlight, their anticipation growing in the shared silence. They were spectators in an ancient amphitheater, waiting for a performance only they knew was scheduled. The group dynamics added a human layer to the experience. There was John Lear, a legendary figure in UFO circles in his own right, Gene Huff, a friend, and others. They were not passive observers, but active participants in a moment of potential history. Jokes and nervous laughter would briefly break the tension, but mostly, they waited in a companionable, watchful quiet. The shared purpose created a bond, a small community of believers huddled together under the cosmos, united by the promise of witnessing the impossible. This wasn't just sightseeing, it was a vigil. As the scheduled time approached, the tension became palpable. Every set of eyes would be glued to the southwestern sky, scanning the dark silhouette of the mountains for any anomaly. Doubt would momentarily flicker. Was this all an elaborate mistake? The desert, in its immense patience, offered no clues. Minutes would feel like hours. Then, the stories recount. The routine would prove true. And then, right on schedule, the lights would appear. What the group witnessed from their desert perch, according to their collective testimonies, defied any conventional explanation. The lights would appear in the southwestern sky, near the hidden S4 facility. They were not the distant, steady pinpricks of aircraft landing lights. They were described as brilliant, intense points of light, often a stark, piercing blue-white or sometimes a warmer amber hue. They didn't drift. They moved with a purposeful, intelligent energy, executing maneuvers that seemed to rewrite the laws of aerodynamics right before the observer's disbelieving eyes. The flight patterns were the most immediately astonishing aspect. The lights would perform sudden, razor-sharp 90-degree turns at incredible speeds, without any arc or banking maneuver. There were no sweeping curves, no gentle ascents or descents. The movement was instantaneous, as if the object could disregard inertia entirely. At other times, a light would streak across the basin at a velocity far surpassing any known jet, only to stop dead in midair, hovering in perfect, silent stillness against the starfield. It would hang there, a defiant contradiction, before darting off again on a new, impossible vector. Witness testimonies from those present, like John Lear and Gene Huff, consistently echoed these descriptions. They spoke of seeing multiple lights interacting, dancing in complex, synchronized patterns that no human pilots could sustain. They described the objects making sudden vertical drops or climbs that would generate forces far beyond what any human body could withstand. The predictability of the Wednesday night schedule was, in itself, a strange clue. Whatever was flying operated on a routine, suggesting test protocols or perhaps regular, operational flights from the secret base. The phenomenon was both otherworldly and bureaucratically scheduled. The visual characteristics were deeply unsettling to the rational mind. Beyond the colors, witnesses noted an absence of sound. Even when a light shot across the sky at blistering speed, it did so in utter silence. No roar of engines, no sonic boom. The lights themselves sometimes seemed to pulse or shift in intensity, as if their brightness was linked to their power output or mode of travel. On nights with clearer atmospheric conditions, some claimed to see not just a light, but a faint, dark, disc-shaped silhouette blotting out the stars as it passed, giving form to the brilliance. The emotional reactions of the witnesses ranged from pure, childlike wonder to a deep, primal unease. There were gasps, stunned silences, and spontaneous exclamations of disbelief. The shared experience validated their presence. They could point, whisper, and confirm with each other that they were all seeing the same impossible thing. This wasn't a solitary, unverifiable event. It was a group epiphany. The excitement was tempered by a dawning realization. They were watching technology that belonged to science fiction performing with casual ease in their very real, very dark desert sky. The maneuvers observed became the core of the mystery. An object would accelerate from a dead hover to a velocity that made it a mere streak of light in an eye blink. It would execute a zigzag pattern at impossible angles, like a photon bouncing off mirrors. Most chillingly, some accounts describe a light performing a sudden, instantaneous translation, disappearing from one point in the sky and reappearing in another without traversing the space in between. These were not demonstrations of superior speed, but of a different physics altogether, a mastery of space-time that rendered human concepts of flight quaint and obsolete. Using sensory language, one can try to imagine the scene. The cold desert air on your face, the gritty soil beneath your boots, the immense bowl of stars above, and in the center of it all, a light moving with a silent, sentient grace that mocks everything you know. The vast, ancient silence of the desert is broken not by sound, but by this silent, visual thunderclap of advanced motion. It creates a cognitive itch, a desperate need to categorize what you're seeing, only to find every mental file drawer empty. The experience leaves you with more questions than answers, lodged deep in your memory. These weren't planes, helicopters, or anything in the conventional arsenal. So what were they? A secret, once shared, becomes harder to contain. As Bob Lazar's core group of friends witnessed the impossible Wednesday night lights, they naturally spoke to their own close confidants. The story, too incredible to keep bottled, began to ripple outward through Las Vegas and the wider UFO community. Word spread like a low-frequency rumor. There was a place in the desert, a specific night, where you could see them for yourself. The viewing location near Tikaboo Peak, once a solitary vigil spot, slowly began to attract others. What started as a private pilgrimage was evolving into an unofficial, public observation event. The crowds began small but grew steadily. Enthusiasts, curiosity seekers, and fellow researchers, armed with binoculars, cameras, and camcorders, started making the long drive out on Wednesday evenings. The barren hilltop transformed into a gathering place for a new kind of desert congregation. Cars would line the lonely roadside, their occupants standing in small groups, all facing the same dark stretch of the Papoose Range. The shared anticipation created a temporary community bound by a singular, extraordinary hope. This burgeoning activity could not escape notice for long. Local media in Las Vegas, always keen on an Area 51 story, began to report on the UFO watchers. News crews occasionally made the trek, filming segments about the growing phenomenon of citizens staring into restricted airspace. The public spectacle was now amplifying Lazar's claims far beyond his own interviews. Every new person who saw the strange lights became a potential believer, and every media story lent the phenomenon a veneer of legitimacy it hadn't possessed when it was just one man's word. For the security apparatus around Area 51, this was a significant and unwelcome development. The fundamental purpose of a black site is invisibility and isolation. A crowd of civilians, however small, regularly assembling at its perimeter with optical equipment represented a direct threat to operational security. It created witnesses, generated footage, and drew a glaring, public arrow toward activities meant to be utterly deniable. The base's secrecy, maintained for decades by sheer remoteness, was now being challenged by a weekly gathering of tourists. The response from the security forces was swift and unmistakable. Observers began reporting a noticeable increase in patrols. Unmarked white jeeps, the signature vehicles of the base's security contractors, often called camo dudes for their desert camouflage uniforms, would appear on nearby ridges, their silhouettes visible against the night sky. Sometimes, the jeeps would slowly cruise along the perimeter road, their lights off, a silent assertion of controlled territory. Helicopters, distinct from the strange lights, would occasionally sweep the area, their searchlights cutting through the darkness to scan the gathering points, a clear message of surveillance. This initiated a tense, low-stakes cat-and-mouse game. The watchers would arrive, trying to be discreet. Security would observe them, sometimes approaching to check identifications and warn them about trespassing on government land or creating a safety hazard. The watchers would then scatter to other, slightly more distant vantage points, only for the process to repeat the following week. The atmosphere shifted from one of pure wonder to one edged with nervous tension, the thrill of the hunt now mixed with the risk of confrontation. This escalation created an unavoidable pressure point. The secret was out of the bag, and a public standoff was developing in the desert every Wednesday. The situation was unsustainable for the guardians of the base. They could not allow a carnival atmosphere to take root at their fence line. The very act of sharing the experience, of creating multiple credible witnesses, had shifted the dynamic. It was no longer just about Bob Lazar's words. It was about dozens of independent pairs of eyes. Lazar had shown too many people the impossible. Now there would be consequences. In the midst of the growing desert vigil, a different kind of storm descended upon Bob Lazar. On June 22, 1990, he was arrested by Las Vegas police. The charges were jarringly incongruous with his public persona. He was accused of aiding and abetting prostitution. According to police reports, Lazar's name was found in the ledger of an illegal brothel operating out of a Las Vegas apartment. The arrest was not for visiting the establishment, but for allegedly helping to install and repair its computer and security systems, a technical service that, under Nevada law, constituted aiding a criminal enterprise. The timing of the arrest immediately raised eyebrows among his supporters and neutral observers alike. It occurred at the zenith of the Wednesday night viewings and the intense media scrutiny of his Area 51 claims. Just as his story was gaining tangible, public traction through the witnessed lights, a scandal of a deeply personal and reputation-destroying nature hit the headlines. To many, It seemed far too convenient for the authorities, a classic tactic to discredit a problematic whistleblower by attacking his character. Lazar's defense was unequivocal. He claimed he was being set up. He stated that he had been hired to perform legitimate electronics work at what he believed was an ordinary apartment. He alleged that the entire situation was a fabrication orchestrated by government interests to smear his name, destroy his credibility, and divert public attention from his UFO disclosures. A prostitution scandal, he suggested, was the perfect tool, salacious, embarrassing, and guaranteed to make mainstream media and the public view him as a seedy character rather than a serious witness. The legal proceedings that followed were a draining, public ordeal. Lazar ultimately pled nolo contendere, no contest, to a lesser charge of felony accessory. This plea meant he did not admit guilt, but acknowledged the prosecution had enough evidence for a conviction. He was given probation. For skeptics, the plea was an admission of guilt by another name, proof of his criminal leanings. For his supporters, it was a pragmatic decision by a man with limited resources, facing a powerful, stacked deck, choosing to avoid a costly and risky trial. The impact on his credibility was immediate and severe. Headlines that had once read "Physician claims aliens at Area 51" now shifted to "UFO whistleblower nabbed in brothel sting." The narrative around him transformed. In the court of public opinion, the arrest provided an easy reason to dismiss everything he had ever said. Why believe a man about alien spacecraft? The reasoning went, if he's involved with something so sordid. The character assassination, whether deserved or engineered, was profoundly effective. This episode forces a reflection on the methods used to silence inconvenient voices. If Lazar was telling the truth about S4, then discrediting him through a personal scandal would be a textbook counterintelligence strategy, a way to neutralize his testimony without ever having to address its content. The goal isn't to prove the UFO claims false, but to make the claimant appear so morally compromised that no reasonable person would listen. It shifts the debate from "what did he see" to "who is he really?" The arrest hangs over his story not as proof of falsehood, but as a shadow of profound suspicion. Was it coincidence? Or was it a calculated move to silence a man who knew too much? The Wednesday night pilgrimages did not end with a definitive announcement, but with a gradual fading, like a signal growing too weak to hear. The combination of Bob Lazar's personal legal troubles and the increasingly aggressive security response created a chilling effect. The core group that had started the viewings was now preoccupied and, in Lazar's case, publicly tarnished. The sense of adventurous camaraderie that had drawn people to the desert dissipated, replaced by a palpable air of risk and disillusionment. More decisively, the phenomena themselves seemed to change. Regular attendees began to report that the once predictable schedule of the strange lights was no longer reliable. The brilliant, darting performances over the Papoose Range became less frequent, then sporadic, and then vanished altogether from the public's view. It was as if, once the secret of the viewing location was out, the operators of the craft simply shifted their test patterns to other, more secure corridors of airspace, or moved their operations to a different, deeper black site entirely. The show, it seemed, was closed to this particular audience. Security measures escalated from observation to active deterrence. The camo dudes in their white Jeeps became more assertive, sometimes blocking access roads or clearly photographing license plates and individuals. Warnings of trespassing on government land were delivered more sternly. The vast, open basin that had once felt like a frontier for citizen observation now felt like a monitored, hostile territory. The freedom to simply stand and watch the sky was incrementally restricted, the invisible fence of the base expanding outward to push curiosity back. With the end of the viewings, something intangible was lost. It was more than just a tourist attraction. It had been a rare, direct interface between the public and the mystery. For a brief period, The impenetrable wall of secrecy around Area 51 had developed a tiny, transparent window. Ordinary people could go and see something anomalous with their own eyes, forming their own conclusions. That window provided a form of raw, experiential data that no government denial or expert debunking could entirely erase. Its closure marked a return to abstraction, to stories and claims rather than shared, witnessed events. The broader implications touch on the nature of transparency in a democracy. The viewings had created an ad hoc, civilian form of oversight, however limited. They demonstrated a public hunger for answers and a willingness to seek them out. When that effort was met not with engagement, but with increased secrecy and obstruction, it reinforced an ancient dynamic. That profound power operates most comfortably in darkness, and any beam of light, however small, will be extinguished. The opportunity for a more open dialogue between the state and its citizens about what truly happens in those deserts was, perhaps, silently rejected. A quiet, melancholic reflection settles over this chapter of the story. For a handful of Wednesday nights, the impossible felt close enough to touch, a shared secret under the stars. That feeling of connection, to a mystery, to each other, to a potential cosmic reality, faded with the lights. The desert returned to its ancient silence, keeping its secrets once more behind a reinforced veil of security and skepticism. The experience leaves a lingering sense of an opportunity missed, a door that was briefly ajar before being firmly, permanently shut. The lights still fly, but now they fly in deeper secrecy. The brief window of visibility had closed. In a story dominated by verbal testimony and contested memories, one physical document has endured as the most tangible piece of evidence in Bob Lazar's favor. It is a photocopy of what appears to be a 1989 W-2 wage and tax statement. This mundane slip of paper, normally filed away and forgotten, is anything but ordinary in this context. The employer listed is not a private company, but the United States Department of Naval Intelligence. The employee is Robert Lazar. For a man claiming to have worked on a black-budget project at a secret base, this document is a potential anchor in reality. The W-2 form shows that Lazar earned $956.64 over the final pay period of the year from this entity. While the amount is small, suggestive of a final, partial payment, or a termination payout, its significance lies in the employer's name. The Department of Naval Intelligence is not a standard, publicly recognized branch. It is typically referred to as the Office of Naval Intelligence, ONI. This slight discrepancy has been a point of scrutiny. However, the document also includes an Employer Identification Number, EIN, a specific code that has been verified by some researchers as belonging to a legitimate naval intelligence funding pool used for compartmentalized projects. At its most basic level, the document proves something. It provides evidence that Bob Lazar was employed, however briefly, by a naval intelligence entity in the relevant time frame. This corroborates his claim of working for a government intelligence branch on a classified assignment. It moves his story beyond pure fantasy into the realm of a person with a demonstrable, if shadowy, connection to the world of military secrecy. It is a data point that cannot be easily dismissed as a complete fabrication. Expert analysis of the document's authenticity has yielded mixed conclusions. Some forensic document examiners, hired by journalists, have stated that the form appears consistent with the paper stock, printing methods, and layout of genuine government W-2s from that era. The EIN has been validated. However, skeptics counter that a sophisticated forgery is always possible, especially given the high stakes of the debate. They also point out that the document only proves he was paid by a naval intelligence account, not that he worked at S-4 or handled alien technology. It could indicate employment at any number of classified facilities or on any number of projects. Skeptical counterarguments thus contextualize the W too carefully. They posit that Lazar could have been a low-level technician or contractor on a more conventional, though still classified, project within the vast Nevada test site complex. His W-2 would be valid, but his interpretation of his work, the S-4 and alien craft narrative, could be an elaborate confabulation built upon a kernel of truth. The document, in this view, proves he had access to secrecy, but not to the specific, cosmic secret he describes. Ultimately, the W-2 occupies a frustrating middle ground. It is a piece of evidence strong enough to prevent the entire story from being laughed away, yet too weak to prove its most sensational claims. It confirms a governmental employment link that aligns with Lazar's narrative, but it does not, and cannot, confirm the existence of Element 115, gravity propulsion, or alien craft. It stands as a silent, bureaucratic witness that something happened, but refuses to say what. It is a piece of paper that confirms something, but leaves the biggest questions unanswered. Another verifiable data point in the labyrinth of Bob Lazar's background emerged not from the desert, but from a seemingly mundane office document, the Los Alamos National Laboratory Telephone Directory. In the 1982 edition, under the listing for Monday to Friday, Physics Research, the name Lazar, Robert, appears with an accompanying extension. This discovery was significant because Los Alamos is one of the most prestigious and secure scientific research facilities in the world, the birthplace of the atomic bomb, and a continuing hub for cutting-edge physics and weapons research. His presence there was a matter of public, if obscure, record. Verification of this listing was straightforward. The directory was a publicly circulated internal document at the time. Multiple copies exist in archives, and journalists have physically inspected them. This evidence solidly proves that Bob Lazar was employed in some capacity at Los Alamos National Laboratory in the early 1980s. It directly contradicts any notion that his entire professional history was invented out of thin air. It places him squarely within the high-security, scientific milieu he claimed to be part of, lending credence to his self-presentation as a physicist working on advanced government projects. The connection to Los Alamos is profoundly suggestive. The laboratory is a crown jewel of the U.S. National Security Science Complex, dealing with the most sensitive technologies imaginable: nuclear weapons, particle physics, and advanced materials science. Employment there, even in a technical or support role, implies a security clearance and an association with elite scientific minds. For supporters of Lazar's story, this is a crucial corroboration. It shows he wasn't an outsider. He was embedded in the very system that would logically be involved in reverse engineering non-human technology, providing a plausible pathway to his later alleged work at S4. This evidence also has implications for his claimed expertise. While the phone directory listing doesn't specify his job title, it simply lists his name under a department. It situates him in a physics research environment. It supports the idea that he had the background and clearance to be considered for a highly sensitive assignment later on. It makes his overall narrative more coherent. A physicist from Los Alamos gets recruited for a Black World project in the Nevada desert. The directory entry acts as a foundational piece, the first verifiable step on the ladder he describes climbing. Skeptics, however, contextualize this evidence with a different emphasis. They agree that Lazar worked at Los Alamos, but they probe the nature of that work. Records confirm he was employed not directly by the lab, but as a contractor for defense firm Kirkmeyer, which later became EG&G. His specific role is less clear. Some sources suggest he was a radiation monitor or an electronics technician. This interpretation paints a picture of a skilled technician with security clearance, not necessarily a lead physicist. In this view, the directory proves he was there, but it doesn't automatically validate the level of scientific authority he later claimed. The phone directory, therefore, acts as a fixed point in a sea of ambiguity. It establishes a concrete fact, a rare moment of consensus in a disputed history. It confirms a link between Bob Lazar and the pinnacle of American secret science. But like the W2, it speaks only to the framework, not the content. It confirms presence and association, but not activity or purpose. It provides a starting line, but the race he describes remains unverified. He worked there. That much is certain. But doing what, and for whom? Beyond documents and employment records, Bob Lazar's story is underpinned by something more personal and pervasive: his demonstrated technical prowess. Throughout his life, both before and after his public disclosures, he has exhibited a hands-on genius for engineering and physics that is difficult to ignore. This practical knowledge forms a compelling backdrop to his claims, forcing the question of whether he was merely a clever fabricator or a man whose skills genuinely matched his extraordinary job description. Lazar's detailed technical descriptions of the S-4 craft have always been a focal point. He didn't just describe a flying saucer. He provided a schematic, a reactor sphere using element 115, 3 gravity amplifiers arranged in a triangle, a waveguide, and an antimatter conversion process. He spoke of the craft's seamless shell and its ability to amplify and focus gravity. To lay audiences, it sounded convincingly complex. To physicists, some aspects aligned with theoretical concepts, like the theoretical island of stability for super-heavy elements, while other details, like the specific mechanics of gravity propulsion, were and remain speculative. His ability to weave these concepts into a coherent, functional system suggested a mind deeply engaged with advanced theoretical and applied physics. This theoretical knowledge was matched by formidable practical achievements. In the 1980s, Lazar built and operated a fully functional particle accelerator in the basement of his Los Alamos residence, a project far beyond the capability of a casual hobbyist. He also constructed a jet-powered car, essentially strapping a hydrogen peroxide rocket engine to a Honda, demonstrating not just an understanding of high-energy propulsion, but a fearless, hands-on approach to implementing it. He later ran a business modifying and selling jet cars, further cementing his identity as a propulsion specialist. These were not the acts of a man who merely read about science. They were the projects of an intuitive engineer and physicist. Evaluating his understanding requires separating two ideas: knowledge of physics principles and knowledge of specific, alleged alien technology. Experts who have analyzed his interviews note that his language and conceptual grasp are consistent with someone educated in physics and engineering. He uses terms correctly and constructs logical, if unproven, systems. However, experts also uniformly state that his described propulsion method, while a fascinating thought experiment, is not achievable with known science. The debate, then, is not whether he is knowledgeable, but whether his knowledge source is terrestrial education and a brilliant, speculative mind, or first-hand exposure to extraterrestrial engineering. Opinions on his technical credibility thus diverge sharply. Some physicists and engineers who have engaged with him personally have come away impressed by his intuitive grasp of complex systems. They see the mind of a natural-born engineer, the kind of person who might indeed be recruited for a back engineering project. Other experts, viewing the same data, see a highly intelligent and well-read individual who has constructed an internally consistent but fictional narrative using concepts from the fringes of legitimate science, combined with his own hands-on engineering experience to lend it authenticity. His jet car business and other ventures paint a picture of a man whose entire life revolved around speed, energy, and advanced mechanics. This verifiable passion forms the bedrock of his character. It makes his story feel organic. Of course, a man obsessed with pushing the boundaries of terrestrial propulsion would be fascinated by a craft that does so flawlessly. The question becomes one of proximity. Was this passion the qualification that brought him to the alien technology, Or was the alien technology a fictional outlet he created to explain and elevate his lifelong passion? His technical knowledge is undeniable, but is it the knowledge of a reverse engineering physicist or simply a skilled engineer? Of all the technical details in Bob Lazar's narrative, one stands out with a particular crystalline clarity: his specific and repeated references to element 115. In 1989, when he first went public, this was not a term on any chemist's periodic table. It was a placeholder, an empty box awaiting discovery on the farthest, heaviest end of the chart. Lazar didn't just mention it in passing. He placed it at the very heart of his story, describing it as the stable, metallic fuel source for the alien craft's reactor and the key to its gravity propulsion system. He claimed to have handled it, to have seen small, triangular ingots of the stuff. The properties he described were astonishing. His element 115 was stable, not decaying in milliseconds like other human-synthesized super-heavy elements. Its atomic structure, he claimed, produced its own gravitational field or gravity wave. When placed in the craft's reactor and bombarded with protons, a small portion would be converted to element 116, which would then decay, producing antimatter. This antimatter annihilation would provide immense power, while the elemental fuel's gravitational signature was amplified to warp spacetime for propulsion. It was a complete, self-contained theory of an unknown physics, all orbiting a specific, numbered element. The world of science caught up, in a manner of speaking, 14 years later. In 2003, a collaborative team of Russian and American scientists at the Joint Institute for Nuclear Research in Dubna successfully synthesized a few atoms of element 115. They named it moscovium. The discovery was a monumental achievement in nuclear physics, confirming the element could exist. However, the synthesized version was profoundly unstable, lasting less than a second before decaying. This immediately presented a stark discrepancy with Lazar's description of a stable, workable, metallic fuel that could be machined and handled. Scientific analysis highlights this as the critical divide. Mainstream physics explains that the 2003 synthesis and subsequent recreations align perfectly with theoretical models predicting the extreme instability of such heavy elements. Lazar's stable version would require existing in the theoretical island of stability, a hypothesized region of the periodic table where certain super-heavy nuclei might have much longer half-lives due to filled nuclear shells. While this island is a legitimate scientific concept, no element has been found there yet, and moscovium as created is not in it. Lazar's version, therefore, represents not the element as we've created it, but as it might exist in an ideal, stable form. Expert opinions from physicists thus split on the significance of his prediction. Some dismiss it entirely, noting the property mismatch and arguing that referencing element 115 was simply a smart guess by someone following scientific literature about the island of stability. Others find the specificity and timing more curious. They note that in the late 1980s, the island was a niche topic. For Lazar to not only name the element, but integrate it so fundamentally into a propulsion theory suggests either inspired speculation or access to startling information. The coincidence, they admit, is intellectually provocative. This leaves us with a fascinating, unresolved puzzle. On one hand, Lazar named an element that was later discovered, a fact that feels powerfully prescient. On the other, the element discovered does not match the stable, functional material he described. This could mean he had access to information about a different, stable isotope of element 115 that science has not yet created. Or, it could mean he made an educated guess based on cutting-edge theory and got lucky with the number, while being completely wrong about its practical properties. The timeline itself is a hook that catches the curiosity. He spoke of an element that didn't exist. Then it did. Coincidence, or forbidden knowledge? For all the intrigue, documentation, and personal testimony, The Bob Lazar story ultimately rests on a foundational absence: the lack of any incontrovertible physical evidence. There are no clear photographs of the S4 facility or the craft he described, no samples of the mysterious element 115, no schematics smuggled out on microfilm. This void is the single greatest point of leverage for skeptics and the most persistent frustration for believers. In a tale of the most monumental discovery in human history, the tangible proof remains stubbornly out of reach. Lazar himself has addressed this absence. He states that the security protocols at S4 made removing any physical evidence virtually impossible. Personnel were monitored constantly, belongings were searched, and the work environment was sterile and controlled. He has suggested that even if he had managed to sneak out a fragment, its exotic nature would have been impossible to analyze publicly without revealing its origin, and its mere possession would have invited severe repercussions. From his perspective, the absence of proof is not suspicious, but rather the expected outcome of working within an impenetrable security apparatus. This explanation dovetails with what is known about real-world black sites. The compartmentalization is designed to be total. The principle of need to know extends to physical access. You cannot take what you are not explicitly allowed to handle. The argument holds that if such a program exists, its greatest success would be leaving no evidence of its existence. Therefore, the lack of proof could paradoxically be consistent with the reality of an ultra-secret program, rather than evidence against it. From the skeptical viewpoint, however, this absence is the story's fatal flaw. They invoke the principle of the burden of proof. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. Lazar made the most extraordinary claim imaginable, yet after decades, he has provided nothing that meets that standard. The W2 and phone directory prove employment, not aliens. The element 115 prediction is an interesting coincidence, not proof. Skeptics argue that the consistent retreat to this security made it impossible. Defense is a classic feature of unfalsifiable claims. It conveniently explains why no evidence can ever be produced, making the story immune to normal scrutiny. The convenient nature of this evidentiary void is often highlighted. If his story were true, one might expect something tangible to have slipped through: a blurry photo, a strange material fragment, a corroborating document from another source. That nothing has, despite the story being public for over 30 years and inspiring countless investigations, is seen by critics as highly suggestive. It allows the narrative to exist in a permanent state of potential, never forced to confront the harsh test of physical verification. If his claims are true, one is left to wonder what proof should logically exist. Other whistleblowers in different fields have often risked everything to secrete out documents. The very scale of the operation he describes, multiple craft, a large facility, numerous personnel, would seem to increase the odds of a leak or a mistake. That the only leak is his verbal testimony, and that no other insider has ever come forward with matching physical evidence, is a point that even sympathetic observers must quietly ponder. It remains the story's greatest hurdle. This honest assessment does not dismiss the narrative, but it frames its true nature. Without physical evidence, the story exists in the realm of compelling personal testimony, intriguing circumstantial details, and unverified claims. It becomes a matter of belief rather than proof, of weighing the character of the witness against the enormity of his tale. The investigation hits a wall not made of government secrecy, but of missing data. In the absence of proof, we're left with a story, extraordinary, detailed, and impossible to verify. When examining the skeptical case against Bob Lazar, one must begin with the work of Stanton Friedman. Friedman was not a dismissive outsider. He was a nuclear physicist and one of the most respected, tenacious UFO researchers of his generation. He was the original civilian investigator of the Roswell incident and a man deeply committed to the reality of the UFO phenomenon. If anyone was predisposed to take a whistleblower like Lazar seriously, it was Friedman. This made his eventual, detailed critique all the more significant and compelling. Friedman launched a meticulous, years-long investigation into Lazar's background, treating it with the rigor he applied to any potential evidence. He began with the foundational claims, the education at MIT and Caltech. Friedman contacted the registrars of both institutions, requesting verification. Both responded unequivocally. They had no record of a Robert Lazar, Bob Lazar, or any variant earning a degree or attending classes in the relevant time periods. He scoured yearbooks and alumni directories, finding no trace. This wasn't a casual dismissal. It was a documented absence from the primary sources. The investigation uncovered a pattern of inconsistencies beyond education. Friedman traced Lazar's employment history, noting the gap between his actual documented roles, such as his work as a contractor at Los Alamos, and the prestigious physicist identity he presented publicly. He analyzed the W-2 document, acknowledging its peculiarities but questioning why such a thin piece of evidence was presented as a cornerstone. Friedman methodically compared Lazar's public timeline with verifiable records, finding points where the narrative seemed to stretch or blur to fit the more impressive story. Friedman's conclusions were firm and detailed in his reports and lectures. He determined that Lazar had fabricated his academic credentials and had likely inflated his role at Los Alamos from a technical position to that of a physicist. He argued that Lazar's story was a clever pastiche of then-current UFO lore, fringe science concepts about element 115 and gravity propulsion, and his own genuine interest in advanced engineering. For Friedman, the lack of verifiable evidence for the core claims, contrasted with the disproven educational ones, pointed overwhelmingly to fabrication. Presenting Friedman's arguments methodically is crucial to fairness. He didn't call Lazar names. He presented a fact-based case. He showed that the places Lazar claimed to have been had no record of him. He pointed out that Lazar's story emerged just as public interest in Area 51 was spiking, making it a culturally resonant moment for such a disclosure. Friedman's work represents skepticism not as cynicism, but as a demand for evidence commensurate with the claim, a standard he felt Lazar categorically failed to meet. The significance of Friedman's position cannot be overstated. Here was a legendary UFO researcher, a man who had spent his life arguing that governments were covering up the truth about extraterrestrial visitation, effectively debunking one of the most famous whistleblowers in the field. It created a fascinating schism within ufology itself. It demonstrated that serious investigation could lead away from a tantalizing story if the facts didn't support it. Friedman's investigation stands as a monument to applying critical thinking even to claims one might desperately want to believe. If anyone wanted to believe Lazar, it was Friedman. But the evidence, or lack thereof, told a different story. The most persistent and damaging challenge to Bob Lazar's credibility is the complete absence of records supporting his education at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology and the California Institute of Technology. This isn't a minor discrepancy. It strikes at the heart of his identity as a scientist qualified for the work he described. The investigation into these claims has been thorough. Journalists and researchers have submitted formal requests to the registrars of both MIT and Caltech. The responses have been consistent for decades. No degrees were conferred, no coursework was completed, and no student named Robert Lazar appears in their archives from the years he specified. Beyond official registrar statements, the investigation extended to the human and material record. Alumni yearbooks from the relevant classes at both institutions have been examined page by page. His face and name are not there. Researchers have contacted professors who taught during that period and classmates who should remember a fellow student. No one recalls him. The silence is total. For skeptics, this constitutes a closed case. The simplest explanation is that he did not attend these schools, and therefore his foundational claim of being a physicist from these elite programs is false. Lazar's explanation for this void is, in itself, a profound claim, that his records were systematically erased by government agents as part of a scrubbing operation to discredit him after he went public. He suggests that his entire past was retroactively edited to make him appear to be a fraud. This theory directly addresses the evidence against him, but in doing so, it invokes a conspiracy of almost supernatural thoroughness, one capable of perfectly deleting him from the records of two of the world's most independent and prestigious universities, including paper archives and personal memories. Discussing the plausibility of such complete record elimination requires a calm assessment. While government agencies certainly have the power to classify and conceal ongoing operations, retroactively altering the historical public records of private, world-renowned institutions is a different order of magnitude. It would require a seamless, covert operation involving multiple non-governmental employees at each school, with zero leaks, all to discredit one man. To many, this seems less plausible than the alternative, that the records were never there to begin with. Complicating the picture are the educational records that were found. Enrollment records from Pierce College, a community college in Los Angeles, show Lazar took electronics courses. He also attended Cal State Northridge for a semester. These demonstrate an interest in technical subjects and a presence in the Southern California educational system, but they are a universe away from advanced physics degrees from MIT and Caltech. For critics, these are his real educational footprints, and the elite school claims are a later fabrication. Expert opinions on records management tend to side with the improbability of a perfect erasure. Archivists note that student records are dispersed in registrar files, department records, library archives, alumni associations, and personal memorabilia of other students. A truly complete deletion across all these domains, including the memories of peers, would be an unprecedented feat of clandestine administration. This leaves two stark possibilities, each unsettling in its own way. Records vanish, or they never existed. Either scenario raises troubling questions. Beyond questions of personal history, Bob Lazar's story faces scrutiny on the grounds of the science he describes. While his technical demeanor is convincing to a lay audience, physicists and engineers who have parsed his statements have identified a series of inconsistencies and conceptual problems. The first and most famous is the element 115 claim. Lazar described a stable, metallic isotope used as fuel. However, when element 115, moscovium, was synthesized in 2003, it was profoundly unstable, lasting milliseconds. While Lazar's version could theoretically refer to an isotope in the hypothesized island of stability, no such stable superheavy element has ever been created or observed. His description thus relies on a physics that is not just unknown, but currently non-existent. The gravity propulsion system presents another major hurdle. Lazar described the craft generating and amplifying gravity waves to create lift and propulsion. In mainstream physics, gravity waves are ripples in space-time caused by catastrophic cosmic events like colliding black holes. They are not a force you can generate in a small reactor for propulsion. What he may be referring to is the theoretical concept of manipulating the gravitational field itself, but the mechanics he outlines, using element 115 as a source, have no basis in any published, peer-reviewed physics. Experts note that his explanations mix real terms, gravity waves, antimatter, in ways that sound plausible but describe processes that are not scientifically coherent. Terminology errors and conceptual blurring appear throughout his technical interviews. At times, he uses the jargon of particle physics correctly. At other moments, he conflates concepts or uses terms in ways that suggest a superficial understanding rather than deep expertise. Some physicist critics have argued that his knowledge appears to be that of a very bright enthusiast or an engineer who has read widely on fringe topics, rather than that of a trained physicist who worked on a bleeding-edge project. The errors are not glaringly obvious to non-specialists, but they are telling to those in the field. The stable isotope issue is particularly thorny. Even if a stable isotope of element 115 existed, the process Lazar describes, bombarding it with protons to create element 116, which then produces antimatter, involves nuclear reactions that would likely make the material highly radioactive and dangerous to handle, contrary to his description of handling ingots. Furthermore, the efficiency of such a system, from a physics standpoint, is highly questionable. The critiques from physicists are not merely dismissive. They point out specific, fundamental ways in which Lazar's described technology contradicts established principles of nuclear physics, quantum mechanics, and general relativity. This leads to a critical interpretive question. Do these scientific errors indicate that Lazar is lying, or could they indicate something else? One possibility is that he is simplifying or misremembering complex information he was exposed to briefly. Another is that he is conveying concepts as they were presented to him by others in the program, who may have used simplified models or even disinformation. Or, perhaps most controversially, it could mean the technology operates on principles so advanced they appear to be magic or nonsense to current human science. Including the possibility of deliberate simplification is important. In a compartmentalized program, a technician might be given a functional explanation. This element fuels the gravity drive, without the underlying unified field theory. His retelling of that simplified explanation would then naturally contain gaps and inconsistencies when measured against known science. This doesn't prove the story true, but it offers a potential bridge between the detailed testimony and the scientific criticisms. The science doesn't quite add up. But does that mean it's fiction, or that we're missing something? Any full assessment of Bob Lazar must contend with the personal controversies that have marked his life since going public. These are not peripheral details. They have been used by critics to paint a portrait of a man whose character undermines his credibility. The most prominent of these is his 1990 arrest and subsequent nolo contendere plea to a felony charge of being an accessory to a prostitution operation. The scandal, arriving at the height of the Wednesday night viewings, was a devastating blow to his public image, allowing media and skeptics to frame him not as a physicist, but as a seedy figure involved in a criminal underworld. Financial troubles have also been part of his narrative. Lazar filed for bankruptcy in the 1980s, and his various business ventures, including his jet car company, have faced struggles. For detractors, this paints a picture of a man under financial pressure, potentially providing a motive for fabricating a sensational story to gain notoriety or profit. The narrative of a struggling entrepreneur crafting an elaborate tale to revive his fortunes is a classic skeptical trope, and Lazar's financial history provides just enough fodder to make it plausible to some. A more complex and less substantiated claim that occasionally surfaces involves alleged connections to brothel ownership beyond the 1990 arrest. These rumors, often vague and sourced from tabloids or anonymous claims, further cement the seedy narrative for those predisposed to disbelieve him. It is crucial, however, to separate verified legal events from unsubstantiated gossip, as the latter often serves as mere mudslinging in a heated debate over his credibility. When presenting these facts, it is vital to consider Lazar's own defense, that these events were not coincidences, but orchestrated attacks, a form of character assassination designed to destroy his reputation and, by extension, the impact of his disclosures. From this perspective, the prostitution sting was a setup, and financial pressures could be exacerbated by being blacklisted from conventional employment. This view frames the personal troubles not as evidence of a flawed character, but as evidence of the lengths to which powerful interests would go to silence him. Discussing the impact on overall credibility requires a delicate balance. In a perfect world, the truth of a claim about physics and technology would stand independent of the claimant's personal life. In reality, human psychology doesn't work that way. We instinctively distrust information from sources we perceive as morally compromised. The character questions undoubtedly make it easier for the public and media to dismiss Lazar without engaging with the technical aspects of his story. They act as a powerful psychological filter. Maintaining empathy is key to a fair analysis. Lazar has lived for decades under an unprecedented kind of spotlight, one that magnifies every mistake and controversy. The pressures of such a life could exacerbate any personal frailties. To dismiss his entire testimony based on these issues is to engage in an ad hominem argument, attacking the man rather than the claim. Yet, to ignore them entirely would be naive. They form part of the holistic picture we must consider. Every man has flaws. The question is whether these flaws invalidate everything he says. If one does not accept the extraterrestrial explanation for Bob Lazar's story, other possibilities must be considered. These alternative theories attempt to explain how a man could possess such detailed, compelling knowledge without having worked on alien craft. One prominent alternative is that Lazar did indeed work on a classified project at or near Area 51, but that project involved advanced human technology. This could include next-generation aircraft using unconventional propulsion, like pulse detonation or hypersonic platforms, stealth technology beyond the B-2, or psychological warfare experiments. His alien craft could be a misinterpretation of, or a speculative story built around, a real but terrestrial black project. Expanding on this, perhaps he was a technician on a program like the alleged Aurora spy plane or other experimental aerospace platforms. The bizarre flight characteristics he describes could be exaggerations of real capabilities, like extreme maneuverability, or misunderstandings of classified performance data he was exposed to. His Element 115 claims could then be an inventive cover story for a more mundane, yet still highly secret, power source or propellant. In this view, he is a real whistleblower of sorts, but the secret he reveals is one of advanced human engineering, not extraterrestrial contact. A more cynical alternative is the disinformation agent theory. In this scenario, Lazar was either wittingly or unwittingly used by intelligence agencies to sow confusion. By putting a compelling but ultimately false story into the public domain, agencies could discredit serious UFO research, distract from real black projects, or test public reaction to disclosure concepts. His detailed narrative would be crafted to be convincing, with just enough verifiable crumbs, like the W2, to create debate, thereby successfully muddying the waters for decades. A simpler, psychological explanation points to motivation. Lazar, a brilliant but financially struggling engineer with a passion for propulsion, may have crafted the story for attention, fame, or financial gain. The narrative would be a synthesis of his real technical knowledge, current UFO lore, and scientific speculation. The initial media frenzy and subsequent notoriety could have then locked him into maintaining the story, which evolved and solidified over time. This doesn't necessarily make him a malicious liar, but perhaps a storyteller who became trapped by his own creation. Related to this is the concept of false or confabulated memory. Under this model, Lazar may have had some peripheral exposure to secrecy at Los Alamos or elsewhere. Over time, through intense interest in UFOs and advanced physics, his mind could have woven these fragments into a coherent, detailed, and subjectively real memory of working on alien technology. He would believe his story utterly, passing polygraphs, because in his mind, it is true. This explains the sincerity without requiring the reality of the events. Presenting each alternative fairly allows for a richer understanding of the enigma. They are not all mutually exclusive, and some blend together. They serve as reminders that human truth is complex, and that the desire for a simple answer, whether he's a liar or he's a hero, often overlooks the messy middle ground where most realities reside. The Lazar story forces us to confront not just the possibility of aliens, but the nature of belief, evidence, and narrative itself. Perhaps the truth is stranger than aliens, or more mundane than we want to believe. On the other side of the credibility equation stands George Knapp, an award-winning investigative journalist whose career has become inextricably linked with the Bob Lazar story. Knapp was not a UFO enthusiast when he first encountered Lazar. He was a respected reporter for Las Vegas television station KLAS, known for hard-nosed investigations into political corruption and organized crime. When a source claiming to be a physicist with an unbelievable story about Area 51 contacted him, Knapp's first instinct was profound skepticism. His subsequent, decades-long investigation, however, led him to a startling conclusion. He believed Bob Lazar was telling the truth. Knapp's approach was journalistic, not ideological. He began by conducting extensive background checks, verifying what could be verified. He confirmed Lazar's employment at Los Alamos National Laboratory through the phone directory and former colleagues, establishing that Lazar was indeed a part of that high-security scientific world. He tracked down and interviewed people who knew Lazar before his public emergence, seeking their impressions of his character and capabilities. Knapp didn't find a fantasist. He found a man described by peers as a brilliant, if unconventional, technical mind with a passion for propulsion physics. The journalist expanded his investigation beyond Lazar himself. He sought out and interviewed other individuals who claimed to have worked at or had knowledge of the S-4 facility, finding a small handful of sources whose stories, told independently, contained eerie parallels to Lazar's descriptions of the base's layout and operations. Knapp also worked to verify the logistical details of Lazar's account, the commuter flights, the security protocols, finding former employees of the alleged support contractors who corroborated elements of the process, if not the ultimate purpose. Knapp's continued, public defense of Lazar's story over more than 30 years is a significant aspect of the case. He has staked his professional reputation on it, discussing it in countless interviews, documentaries, and on his own radio programs. He has consistently presented the evidence he finds compelling while honestly acknowledging the gaps and controversies. For Knapp, it is not a matter of blind faith, but of cumulative evidence. The verifiable details, the corroborating witnesses, and Lazar's own unwavering consistency under pressure convinced him that the core of the story was real. What convinced a skeptical journalist to take such a risk? Knapp has pointed to several factors. The specific, technical nature of Lazar's descriptions that went far beyond generic UFO lore. The physical evidence like the W-2 that, while imperfect, suggested a government intelligence connection. And perhaps most importantly, the behavior of the authorities, the intense security response, the lack of a normal debunking prosecution, and the pattern of harassment Lazar reported, which to Knapp felt like the authentic hallmarks of a real whistleblower being silenced, not a hoaxer being ignored. The professional risks for Knapp were real. Taking a UFO whistleblower seriously in the late 1980s was a fast track to being labeled a tabloid journalist and losing credibility with mainstream media peers. Yet, he pursued the story, won awards for his reporting on it, and has never backed away. His involvement provides a layer of journalistic due diligence that the story would otherwise lack. Knapp had everything to lose by believing Lazar. He believed anyway. Why? While Bob Lazar is the central figure, his narrative is not entirely solitary. A small but significant group of corroborating witnesses and supporters have added threads of external validation to his tapestry. These individuals lend weight to the idea that Lazar's story is not a singular fabrication, but part of a larger, hidden reality. The most direct form of corroboration comes from the other participants in the famous Wednesday night viewings, friends like John Lear and Gene Huff. They have consistently and publicly testified for decades about what they saw. Brilliant lights executing impossible maneuvers over the Papoose Range on a predictable schedule. Their independent accounts transform the event from one man's claim to a shared, witnessed phenomenon. Beyond the viewing parties, there are others who have come forward with claims of involvement at S4 or similar facilities. Their stories are often fragmented and delivered under conditions of anonymity, fearing repercussions. However, some investigators, including George Knapp, have interviewed these individuals. While their testimonies vary in detail, recurring elements appear. Descriptions of a facility built into a mountain near Area 51, of disc-shaped craft and hangars, and of an atmosphere of extreme secrecy and fear. These parallel accounts, though unverifiable independently, create a pattern that suggests Lazar was not the only person with knowledge of such a place. Testimony from those who knew Lazar before his public emergence is another form of support. Former colleagues from his Los Alamos days or from his electronics businesses have spoken about his technical genius, his ability to grasp and explain complex systems, and his straightforward demeanor. They often express surprise at his story, but rarely accuse him of being a liar or a fantasist. Instead, they describe a serious, focused individual whose sudden notoriety seemed at odds with the man they knew. These character witnesses don't prove his UFO claims, but they challenge the portrait of him as a pathological liar or attention seeker. Professional colleagues who confirm his technical abilities provide crucial context. Fellow engineers who worked with him on his jet car projects or other ventures attest to his practical skills in propulsion and systems integration. This corroborates the image of a man whose expertise was genuine and formidable, even if the application he describes is extraordinary. It supports the premise that he possessed the kind of mind that would be recruited for a back engineering project, regardless of the origin of the technology being studied. The cumulative weight of this supporting testimony is its greatest strength. No single secondary witness provides a smoking gun. Instead, they create a circumstantial web. One person confirms the employment history. Another confirms the viewing of anomalous lights. A third confirms the technical prowess. A fourth tells a similar story about a secret base. Individually, each point could be explained away, coincidence, mistake, or fabrication. Collectively, however, they build a picture that is harder to dismiss entirely. They suggest that Lazar's story emerged from a context containing real secrecy, real sightings, and real expertise. One man's story becomes less easily dismissed when others tell similar tales. One of the most compelling psychological arguments in favor of Bob Lazar's credibility is the remarkable consistency of his story over an exceptionally long period. From his first shadowy interview as Dennis in 1989 to his detailed conversations in the 2018 documentary Bob Lazar, Area 51 and Flying Saucers, and recent podcast appearances, the core narrative has remained virtually unchanged. The facility is S4. There are 9 craft. The fuel is element 115. The propulsion works by gravity amplification. The test flights were on Wednesdays. The major details are fixed points in a story told across 3 decades. This consistency is noteworthy because it defies a common pattern in deception. Liars, or those confabulating a story, typically struggle to maintain perfect recall of fabricated details over time. They embellish, contradict themselves, or adjust the narrative as new information comes to light or as they forget earlier versions. Lazar has not done this. In countless interviews with different hosts, under varying types of questioning, from friendly to hostile, he has stuck to the same fundamental script. The peripheral details might be recounted with slight variations in phrasing, but the architectural pillars of the story are unchanging. The lack of contradiction is particularly evident when comparing early media appearances with recent ones. In the 1990 Kloss interviews with George Knapp, he describes the craft's interior, the small seats, the reactor. In the 2018 documentary, he describes them again, using the same terminology and emphasizing the same strange details. He hasn't added spectacular new elements, like meeting aliens, to make the story more sensational over time, nor has he retreated from any of the original, bold claims. This narrative discipline is unusual. Psychological expert opinions on truth-telling often highlight consistency as a key indicator, though not a definitive one. A rehearsed lie can also be consistent. However, experts note that for a story of this complexity, maintained under intense public scrutiny for decades, the cognitive load of maintaining a perfect fabrication would be immense. The emotional strain of living a lie on such a scale often leads to leaks or breakdowns. Lazar's calm, steady reiteration suggests either a deeply internalized truth or a level of psychological discipline rarely seen. The 2018 documentary, directed by Jeremy Corbell, served as a powerful testament to this consistency. By intercutting archival footage with new interviews, it visually demonstrated how little Lazar's account had deviated. It also captured his emotional state, a mixture of weariness and unwavering conviction. The film presented a man who was not profiting from his story in any grand way, but who was still, 30 years later, burdened by it and committed to it. This longevity and lack of financial spectacle add to the impression of sincerity. Ultimately, the consistency forces a binary consideration, neither side of which is simple. Either the story is a fixed, true memory of real events, replaying with the clarity of a traumatic or profound experience, or it is a meticulously constructed and maintained fiction, a tale so well rehearsed it has become his reality, requiring a formidable act of will to sustain against all pressure. There is little comfortable middle ground. 30 years, and the story hasn't changed. That either means it's true, or he's the most disciplined liar in history. Among the more unusual and personal pieces of supporting evidence in Bob Lazar's account is his well-documented struggle with severe, debilitating migraines. He has stated, and medical records appear to confirm, that these intense headaches began suddenly and with unusual severity during or shortly after the period he claims to have worked at the S4 facility. He attributes them directly to his work environment there, suggesting they were caused by exposure to radiation, unusual electromagnetic fields, or other energetic phenomena emanating from the craft or its reactor during testing and examination. Medical documentation of his condition exists. He has been treated for these migraines for decades, and they have been severe enough to be disabling at times. The timing of their onset is a critical detail. If his employment timeline is accurate, these medical issues began not during a period of stress from public exposure, but beforehand, during his alleged time working in secrecy. This chronology is important. It suggests the physical symptom originated from the secret experience itself, not from the psychological stress of later defending a fabricated story under public scrutiny. The nature of his claim invites analysis. Could these migraines be psychosomatic, a physical manifestation of psychological stress or conflict related to either the burden of his secret or, skeptics would argue, the cognitive dissonance of maintaining a lie? This is a medically plausible explanation. Severe stress can indeed trigger migraine disorders. However, Lazar's steadfast linking of the pain to specific work conditions, like being near an active reactor, adds a layer of specificity that feels less like generalized anxiety and more like a targeted physiological memory. The coincidence of timing is striking. A man tells a story about working on extraordinarily advanced technology with unknown energy outputs, and he simultaneously develops a severe, chronic neurological condition. For supporters, this is not a coincidence, but a correlation, a physical scar left by the experience. It represents a tangible, if ambiguous, piece of evidence that something happened to him that had a profound physiological effect, aligning with the dangerous and unknown nature of the work he describes. Including expert medical opinions adds necessary perspective. Neurologists consulted on such matters would likely state that while migraines can be triggered by various environmental factors, including exposure to certain types of radiation or intense light, establishing a direct, years later causal link to a specific, unverifiable past event is medically impossible. They could also confirm that the onset of migraines in adulthood is not uncommon and can be idiopathic, of unknown cause. Therefore, the migraines are consistent with his story but cannot prove it. This evidence exists in a frustrating gray area. It is too specific and too personally costly to be easily dismissed as irrelevant, yet it is impossible to independently verify its origin. It adds a human dimension of suffering to the narrative, making it harder to view Lazar as a glib fabulist. He carries a physical reminder of his story, one that causes him real pain. This fact resonates on an empathetic level. It forces a question that goes beyond documents and physics, into the realm of the body itself. His head hurts in ways that match his story. Is that proof, or just another mystery? A fundamental question that underpins the entire Bob Lazar saga is one of motive. If his story is an elaborate fabrication, what did he possibly hope to gain? Scrutinizing the timeline reveals a stark reality. Going public brought him catastrophe, not reward. Before 1989, he had a career, however modest, in technical fields and ran his own business. After going public, he became virtually unemployable in his chosen fields. His reputation was savaged in mainstream media, and he faced relentless scrutiny, harassment, and legal trouble. His personal life was upended, and he lost his privacy forever. Examining potential financial motives reveals a similarly weak case. Unlike many who make sensational claims, Lazar did not parlay his story into significant wealth. There was no best-selling book deal in 1989. His brief co-authorship came later and was not a major success. No lucrative speaking tour, no merchandise line. He continued to make a living through his scientific hobbies and small businesses, like his jet car company. But these were passions he had before his disclosure, not fruits of it. If the goal was money, it was a spectacularly failed plan, 3 decades in the making. The argument that he sought fame is also problematic. The fame he received was overwhelmingly of the most toxic kind, notoriety. He was labeled a fraud, a con man, and a criminal by large segments of the public and press. This is not the adoring fame of a celebrity, but the isolating infamy of a pariah. For a reportedly shy and technical person, this would be a form of psychological torture, not a desired outcome. The attention he received from the UFO community, while supportive, came with its own burdens of expectation and endless interrogation. The personal cost extended deeply into his private life. Relationships were strained or broken under the pressure. The constant threat of surveillance and harassment created an atmosphere of paranoia. The legal battle from his arrest drained resources and energy. He traded a quiet, anonymous life for one of permanent controversy and struggle. This paints a picture of a man who walked into a furnace, not someone stepping onto a stage to bask in applause. The trajectory of his life after 1989 is a graph of steep decline in conventional measures of success and peace. This leads to the core logical challenge for the hoax theory. Why would anyone choose this path? If one constructs a lie, it is typically to achieve a benefit, money, fame, power, revenge. Lazar achieved none of these in any positive sense. Instead, he triggered a lifetime of punishment. This absence of clear, rational motive is a powerful point in his favor. It suggests his actions were not calculated for gain, but compelled by something else, perhaps a burden of truth he could no longer carry, or a profound personal need to be honest about a transformative experience. Presenting this argument is not to say that people never act against their own self-interest. They do, for complex psychological reasons. But the scale and duration of Lazar's sacrifice for his story is extraordinary. It forces even the most skeptical observer to pause and wonder, what could drive a man to willingly accept such destruction unless he felt an absolutely compelling imperative to speak? The motive for lying seems absent, while the motive for truth-telling, a tortured conscience, a drive for transparency, fits the observed facts of his life after 1989. If this is a hoax, it's the most self-destructive hoax in history. To understand the landscape of Bob Lazar's claims, one must first understand the real-world stage upon which they are set, Area 51. This remote tract of Nevada desert was born from absolute necessity in the Cold War spring of 1955. The Central Intelligence Agency, in partnership with Lockheed's Skunk Works division, needed an isolated, secure location to develop and test the U-2 spy plane, a high-altitude reconnaissance aircraft designed to overfly the Soviet Union undetected. The Groom Lake Salt Flat, with its pre-existing airstrip from World War II and its ring of mountains providing a natural radar shield, was the perfect choice. It was a blank slate for secrecy. The U-2 program established the facility's foundational culture. Secrecy was paramount. Workers were flown in from Burbank, California, on unmarked planes with blacked-out windows. They signed oaths that threatened imprisonment or worse for disclosure. The very existence of the base was a state secret. When Soviet radars began detecting the high-flying U-2s, the CIA crafted a cover story for the public, claiming they were NASA weather research planes. This established a pattern of official deception that would become ingrained in the base's DNA for decades to come. Area 51's legacy of innovation continued with the development of the State Route 71 Blackbird in the 1960s. This Mach 3+ reconnaissance aircraft was, like its predecessor, developed in total secrecy at the base. Its radical design and otherworldly capabilities were so advanced that for years, sightings of it were often misreported as UFOs, a poignant irony given the base's later associations. In the 1970s and 80s, the base turned to stealth technology, becoming the birthplace of the F-117 Nighthawk. The angular, radar-evading fighter was another product of the black world, its existence denied until it was accidentally revealed to the public in 1988. The culture at these programs was one of absolute, compartmentalized silence. Engineers worked on individual components without knowing the full design of the aircraft. Test pilots knew only their flight parameters. The concept of need to know was enforced with draconian seriousness. Families of workers knew nothing of their actual jobs. This created a community of people living double lives, a reality that proves it is entirely possible for large groups of individuals to keep world-changing secrets for years, even decades. A telling fact that underscores this power of secrecy is that the U.S. government did not officially acknowledge the existence of Area 51 until 2013, nearly 60 years after its founding, when declassified CIA documents related to the U-2 program finally named it. For most of its history, it was a place that didn't exist according to official policy, despite being one of the most important aerospace testing facilities on Earth. This official non-existence allowed myths to flourish in the void. There are, of course, legitimate and compelling reasons for such extreme military and intelligence secrecy, especially during the existential standoff of the Cold War. Protecting technological advantage, safeguarding intelligence sources and methods, and ensuring operational security are valid national security imperatives. Area 51 served these purposes brilliantly, but its history also demonstrates the immense capability and willingness of the state to create and maintain perfect bubbles of secrecy, to deny the undeniable, and to hide entire cities of activity in plain desert sight. This established capability is the crucial backdrop to any story emerging from that region. If they could hide an entire base for decades, what else might they hide? Before dismissing any claim as impossible, It is instructive to examine the historical record of what has been kept secret, often for generations. The precedent for unbelievable, large-scale classified programs is not speculative. It is documented fact. The Manhattan Project, which developed the atomic bomb during World War II, employed over 130,000 people. Yet, the program remained a near-total secret from the American public and the world until the first bomb was dropped on Hiroshima. Entire cities like Oak Ridge, Tennessee, were built from scratch without their inhabitants knowing the purpose of their work. This proves that vast, world-altering projects can be successfully compartmentalized and hidden. Moving into the Cold War, the CIA's MKUltra program stands as a chilling example. For 2 decades, beginning in the 1950s, the agency conducted secret experiments on unwitting American and Canadian citizens, testing the effects of LSD and other mind control techniques. The program was hidden behind front organizations and funded through shell foundations. It was only exposed through congressional investigations in the 1970s, revealing a truth far stranger and more disturbing than many contemporary conspiracy theories had suggested. The physical audacity of secrecy is exemplified by Project Azorian. In the early 1970s, the CIA secretly built a giant ship, the Glomar Explorer, under the cover of a deep-sea mining operation. Its true mission was to recover a sunken Soviet nuclear submarine from the Pacific Ocean floor, 3 miles below the surface. The 6-year, billion-dollar operation was an engineering marvel and an intelligence coup, and it remained completely unknown to the public until details were leaked in 1975. It demonstrated that projects of immense scale and technical complexity could be hidden behind plausible commercial covers. The development of the F-117 Nighthawk stealth fighter, mentioned in the context of Area 51, is another perfect case study. From the mid-1970s to its unveiling in 1988, the program was a black project. Funding was hidden in other budgets. Test flights were conducted only at night for years. When curious people in the Nevada desert reported seeing strange, angular craft, they were dismissed as UFO witnesses. The impossible triangular aircraft was real all along. Its secrecy maintained by a combination of compartmentalization, official denial, and public ridicule of those who saw it. These programs share common traits. Thousands of workers kept secrets, often for patriotic reasons. Funding was obscured, official channels denied their existence, and the time frame between operation and declassification was measured in decades. They created a pattern where the most outlandish rumors often contained a kernel of truth, and where conspiracy theory was frequently a label applied to leaks of actual conspiracies of silence. The individuals involved in these real programs lived the reality that Lazar describes, a life of unshareable work under severe penalty. This historical context is vital. It does not prove Lazar's specific claims, but it demolishes the argument that such a scenario is inherently impossible. It shows that the mechanisms for hiding extraordinary projects, the compartmentalization, the erased identities, the hidden budgets, the culture of silence, are not speculative fiction but established practice. The government has a proven, extensive track record of making the incredible real, and then keeping it secret until the world is ready or forced to know. History shows that the impossible sometimes becomes real, just decades too late. The engine that powers the world of secret projects is money, specifically the classified black budget. This is the portion of the national defense and intelligence budgets that is hidden from public view, its details exempt from normal congressional disclosure. The scale is staggering. Annually, tens of billions of dollars are appropriated for classified programs, a sum that vanishes into a financial void, its ultimate expenditure known only to a select few within the government and its private contractors. This river of dark money provides the means to turn science fiction into classified reality. This black budget funds special access programs, SAPs, the most restrictive category of classified efforts. SAPs are so sensitive that even their existence is often classified. They operate under additional security protocols beyond standard top-secret clearance. Access is granted on an exceptionally strict need-to-know basis, meaning individuals work on isolated pieces of a puzzle without understanding the whole picture. This financial and informational architecture is designed to enable the development of technologies or the execution of operations that, if known, could compromise national security or provide an adversary with critical advantage. A critical feature of this system is the lack of detailed congressional oversight. While select members of Congressional Intelligence and Armed Services Committees are briefed in general terms, the specific technical details, locations, and contractor identities for many SAPs are withheld. The money is approved in large, opaque blocks. This means that projects of almost unimaginable scope and ambition can proceed with minimal external scrutiny, funded by public dollars whose specific use remains a mystery to the public and most of its elected representatives. Private contractor involvement is the other pillar of the system. Corporations like Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, and others receive the majority of black budget funds. They operate their own secure facilities and manage layers of subcontractors. This privatizes much of the secrecy, as corporate proprietary rights and non-disclosure agreements add another legal layer atop government classification. A worker might be employed by a company like EG&G, a major Area 51 contractor, on a SAP, making their secret keeping a matter of corporate liability as well as national security. The financial capability to hide major projects is therefore not just theoretical. It is baked into the funding structure of the national security state. When billions of dollars can be allocated and spent with no public accounting, it creates the potential for endeavors whose scale could match Lazar's descriptions. The development of a stealth bomber costs billions. The back engineering of exotic technology would likely require similar, if not greater, resources. The black budget provides a plausible funding mechanism for such an undertaking, should it exist. Understanding the black budget shifts the question from, could such a program be funded, to what is being funded. It reveals a parallel universe of research and development, operating with resources that dwarf many public scientific initiatives. It is a realm where the normal rules of scientific publication, peer review, and public accountability do not apply. This context makes the Lazar story more plausible, not because it confirms it, but because it confirms the existence of the vast, dark financial ocean in which such a fish could easily swim unseen. Billions of dollars vanish into the black. Where does it go, and what does it buy? Entering the world of classified programs requires more than a job offer. It requires a profound personal transformation, formalized by a secrecy oath. For work at the level Bob Lazar describes, this would typically begin with a top-secret clearance, often with added sensitive compartmented information, SCI, access. Obtaining this clearance involves an exhaustive background investigation, the full-scope polygraph, probing one's finances, relationships, personal habits, and psychological history. The process sends a clear message. Your life is no longer entirely your own. It is a potential security risk to be managed. The most restrictive environments are special access programs, SAPs. These are black programs whose existence is itself classified. Admission to a SAP adds additional layers of non-disclosure agreements and security protocols. The principle of need to know is enforced with absolute rigidity. You are told only what is necessary to perform your specific task. Colleagues in the same building may work on different compartments of the same project without being allowed to discuss their work with each other. This creates a culture of intentional ignorance, where the full picture is known only to a handful of program managers. The legal consequences of breaking these oaths are severe and explicit. The Espionage Act of 1917 and other statutes make the unauthorized disclosure of national defense information a serious felony, punishable by decades in prison. The oath is not a metaphor. It is a binding legal contract with the state. Prosecutions for leaks, even those with no intent to aid an enemy, have resulted in lengthy sentences. The threat is not just professional ruin, but the loss of personal freedom, a sword of Damocles hanging over anyone who considers speaking out. The obligation is lifetime. Even after leaving the program or government service, the classified information in one's mind remains protected. Former employees can be monitored, their communications subject to legal interception if there is suspicion of a breach. They are periodically reinvestigated if they hold a continuing clearance. The secret becomes a permanent tenant in their psyche, a piece of state property they are required to safeguard indefinitely. There is no statute of limitations on a security oath. This system is reinforced by regular polygraph testing and the pervasive awareness of surveillance. Security managers remind personnel that communications may be monitored, movements may be observed, and any deviation from protocol will be detected. This creates an atmosphere of controlled paranoia, designed to make the very thought of disclosure feel dangerous and futile. The psychological weight is immense. It forces individuals to wall off a significant part of their life experience, creating a barrier between their professional and personal identities that can never be fully breached. History provides concrete examples of this enforcement. Cases like those of Reality Winner, a former NSA contractor imprisoned for leaking a single document, or John Kiriakou, a former CIA officer imprisoned for confirming the use of waterboarding, demonstrate the government's willingness to prosecute lower-level personnel. The treatment of figures like Edward Snowden illustrates the ultimate price of large-scale disclosure: permanent exile. These cases prove the consequences are not theoretical. They are the modern embodiment of the warnings given during security briefings. The system is designed to terrify people into silence. The oath doesn't end when you leave. It follows you forever, unless you decide to break it. Bob Lazar's story does not exist in a vacuum. It fits within a long, painful tradition of individuals who have chosen to break secrecy oaths, believing the public's right to know outweighs their legal and contractual obligations. Consider Daniel Ellsberg, who in 1971 leaked the Pentagon Papers, revealing the government's deceit about the Vietnam War. He was prosecuted under the Espionage Act, and the Nixon administration illegally worked to discredit him. His actions, now largely vindicated by history, followed the classic pattern: a traumatic breach of silence followed by intense personal and legal retaliation. In the 21st century, the pattern has continued with even greater intensity. Chelsea Manning provided classified documents exposing wartime atrocities and diplomatic secrets to WikiLeaks. The response was swift: prosecution, conviction, and imprisonment under conditions widely condemned as cruel and unusual. Edward Snowden's 2013 disclosure of global surveillance programs run by the NSA led to charges under the Espionage Act and permanent exile. In both cases, the official playbook was executed: immediate denial of the significance of the leaks, followed by a concerted campaign to destroy the whistleblower's credibility and character, painting them as traitors, criminals, or mentally unstable. This pattern, deny, discredit, destroy, is remarkably consistent. First, the disclosed information is minimized or denied. Then, the whistleblower is subjected to intense personal scrutiny. Their past mistakes are amplified, their motives are questioned, and their mental health is often implicitly or explicitly attacked. Finally, the full force of the legal system is brought to bear, with the goal of both punishing the individual and deterring others. The message is clear: this is what happens to those who break the covenant of silence. The common elements in these stories are striking: a profound internal conflict between duty and conscience, the isolation of carrying a terrible secret, the calculation of immense personal risk, and the ultimate, life-shattering decision to speak. Each whistleblower traded a normal life for one of notoriety, legal peril, and exile, either physical or social. They acted not for personal gain, but from a conviction that the information was too important to remain hidden, a pattern that directly mirrors Lazar's claimed motivations. Placing Lazar in this context is illuminating. While his subject matter is radically different, exotic physics versus war logs or surveillance, the contours of his experience align. He describes the internal burden, the fear, the calculated decision to speak, and then the devastating aftermath. Character assassination, legal troubles, professional destruction, and social isolation. Whether one believes his specific claims or not, the treatment he reports fits the established model for how the system handles those who leak its secrets. This context builds a form of circumstantial validation. His story behaves like other, verified whistleblower stories. Understanding this broader landscape reframes the Lazar saga. It becomes less an isolated tale of UFOs and more a potential entry in a dark ledger of silenced truth-tellers. It suggests that the forces arrayed against him, and the personal cost he endured, may not be evidence that he is lying, but rather evidence that he touched upon something the secrecy state considered genuinely dangerous to disclose. The pattern repeats: speak truth, face destruction. Bob Lazar fits the pattern perfectly. Before November 1989, Area 51 was a term known only to a select few: aviation buffs, some Nevada locals, and those in the intelligence and aerospace communities. It was a classified location absent from official maps and government discourse, a whisper in the world of ufology, but not a mainstream concept. Bob Lazar's public testimony, delivered with such specific and cinematic detail, acted as a cultural detonator. He didn't just mention Area 51. He gave it a story: hangars inside a mountain, alien technology, Wednesday night test flights. He transformed an obscure designation into a narrative universe, injecting it directly into the public imagination. His story provided the blueprint that popular culture would eagerly follow. The massive 1996 blockbuster Independence Day cemented this transformation. In the film, a captured alien spacecraft is reverse-engineered at a secret base in the Nevada desert, a plot point directly mirroring Lazar's claims. The film didn't need to name Lazar. It absorbed and amplified the mythology he had seeded. Suddenly, Area 51 was no longer just a rumor, but a globally recognized symbol of government secrecy and extraterrestrial intrigue, a staple of science fiction. The proliferation of merchandise followed. T-shirts, bumper stickers, and hats emblazoned with Area 51 or alien motifs referencing the base became ubiquitous. Video games like Grand Theft Auto, San Andreas, and Call of Duty Black Ops featured secret Area 51 levels. Television shows from The X-Files to The Simpsons incorporated it into plots. The base became a cultural shorthand for where the government hides the aliens, a meme before the internet age fully understood memes. Lazar's detailed descriptions provided the raw material for this endless creative recycling. This cultural explosion had a tangible geographic effect. The remote desert around the base, once the domain of ranchers and camo dudes, became a tourist destination. People began making pilgrimages to the perimeter, hoping to catch a glimpse of something strange. The tiny town of Rachel, Nevada, on the Extraterrestrial Highway, saw an influx of visitors. This transformation from forbidden zone to curiosity spot was a direct consequence of the public story Lazar told. He created a destination by describing what might be hidden there. The phenomenon reached a surreal apex in 2019 with the Storm Area 51, They Can't Stop All of Us Facebook event. What began as a joke escalated into a planned mass gathering, prompting official statements from the U.S. Air Force and the mobilization of local law enforcement. While only a few thousand people actually showed up, The event demonstrated the incredible cultural power the Area 51 meme had accumulated over 30 years, a power traceable directly to the persistent, viral nature of Lazar's original account. A secret base had become the subject of an internet-fueled attempted raid. This journey from classified obscurity to global icon is a testament to the power of a compelling narrative. The U-2 and State Route 71 were incredible secrets, but they didn't capture the public's imagination in the same enduring way. Lazar's story tied the location to humanity's deepest questions about its place in the cosmos. He provided the why for the secrecy, and pop culture ran with it. One man's testimony turned a secret base into a global symbol. That's influence. The physical manifestation of Bob Lazar's cultural impact is etched into the Nevada desert as a 98-mile stretch of Tulane blacktop. State Route 375, officially designated the Extraterrestrial Highway in 1996. Before Lazar, this was simply a lonely road through some of the most isolated country in America, linking tiny towns and passing the guarded turnoffs to the Nevada test site in the distant Groom Lake Range. Today, it is a destination, a linear theme park for UFO enthusiasts and curious travelers. Its very name a permanent monument to the story that put it on the map. At the heart of this tourism is the Little Ale Inn, a pun on alien, in Rachel, Nevada. What was once a modest bar and motel for locals and truckers has become ground zero for the UFO-seeking community. Its walls are plastered with UFO memorabilia, signed dollar bills from visitors, and newspaper clippings about Lazar and Area 51. It sells alien-themed souvenirs, hosts travelers from around the world, and serves as a communal hub where people share stories and gaze at the night sky, hoping to see the strange lights Lazar and others described. Alien-themed businesses have sprouted along the route, capitalizing on the intrigue. Gift shops sell t-shirts and alien figurines. Quirky art installations, like a crashed flying saucer or a giant green alien. The landscape, perfect for photo opportunities. The economy of this rural region has been subtly but permanently altered. Where income once came from mining or ranching, it now also flows from tourism driven by a story of secret technology and otherworldly visitors. The desert itself has been narratively remapped. The economic impact, while not massive on a national scale, is vital to these remote communities. The inn, the shops, and the associated services provide jobs and sustain local families. The highway attracts not just hardcore ufologists, but families on road trips, bikers, and adventure tourists. They come for the novelty, the stark beauty of the desert, and the faint, thrilling possibility of witnessing something unexplained. They spend money on gas, food, and lodging, all under the banner of the extraterrestrial mythos Lazar helped solidify. Painting a picture of the landscape now requires including these human elements. The vast, silent desert is still there, majestic and forbidding. But now, against that backdrop, you see cars pulled over at designated viewing spots, their occupants peering through binoculars. At night, you might find small groups camped on low ridges, their eyes trained on the same southwestern horizon that Lazar pointed to. The landscape is no longer just geological. It's psychological, a canvas upon which people project hopes for cosmic connection and validation of hidden truths. For the visitors, the experience is a form of secular pilgrimage. They are walking in the footsteps of the story, visiting the places mentioned in interviews and documentaries. They are participating in a communal act of curiosity. Whether they are true believers or simply intrigued tourists, they are there because a narrative drew them. The highway and its attractions exist as a physical, drivable testament to that narrative's power. Where there was nothing, now there's a pilgrimage site. Believers come seeking what Lazar described. Bob Lazar's impact extends far beyond tourism. It fundamentally reshaped the narrative architecture of modern UFO belief and research. Before his emergence, the dominant cultural UFO story was typically one of distant sightings or brief encounters, lights in the sky, abductions, crop circles. Lazar introduced a new and powerful framework, the insider whistleblower. He provided a detailed, technical account of not just seeing a UFO, but of working on them within the most secretive corridors of government. This shifted the paradigm from "what are they" to "what are we doing with them?" This shift is evident in the language and focus of the UFO community that followed. The concept of reverse engineering alien technology moved from fringe speculation to a central pillar of ufology. Discussions became less about alien intentions and more about human cover-ups, black budgets, and secret alliances. Lazar gave the conspiracy a location, S4, a methodology, physics-based back engineering, and a motive, technological supremacy. He provided a detailed skeleton onto which an entire generation of researchers could graft new information and theories. His influence is directly visible in the work of other prominent figures. Investigative journalists like George Knapp built careers around pursuing the threads he exposed. Filmmakers like Jeremy Corbell have centered entire projects on him. Countless authors, podcasters, and researchers have used his testimony as a foundational text. Younger researchers entering the field often cite Lazar's 1989 interviews as their gateway into serious UFO study, captivated by the specificity and calm delivery that set it apart from more sensational tales. The government conspiracy framework he reinforced became the default lens for interpreting UFO phenomena for millions. When the Pentagon's UAP videos were released decades later, the immediate public reaction from many was not, "Are they alien?" but "What is the government really hiding about these?" This presumption of a vast, ongoing cover-up of recovered technology owes a significant debt to the cultural groundwork laid by Lazar's story. He made the idea of a secret government program studying UFOs feel concrete and plausible. The validation believers felt from his testimony cannot be overstated. For decades, people who reported strange sightings were met with ridicule. Here was a man with apparent scientific credentials, describing the inner workings of the very crafts they believed they had seen. He gave them a vocabulary and a context. He made them feel less alone and, in a strange way, less crazy. His story acted as a keystone, holding together various fragments of UFO lore and providing a coherent, if unproven, explanation for why officialdom remained so silent. His legacy, therefore, is not in providing proof, but in providing a narrative. He gave the community a detailed story, a framework for understanding secrecy, and a focal point for its curiosity and outrage. That framework has proven incredibly durable, influencing media, shaping public debate, and setting the terms for how we discuss government transparency and the possibility of non-human intelligence. The UFO community before Lazar and after Lazar are distinct entities. The questions may be ancient, but the way they are asked today bears his unmistakable imprint. He gave the UFO community a detailed narrative, a framework, and a focal point. That community has never been the same. In 2018, nearly 3 decades after Bob Lazar first stepped into the shadows as Dennis, his story received a powerful second act with the release of the documentary Bob Lazar, Area 51 and Flying Saucers, directed by filmmaker Jeremy Corbell. The film was not a retread of old news clips, but a contemporary immersion, following Lazar in the present day and revisiting his claims with fresh eyes and modern filmmaking techniques. Corbell's approach was intimate and advocacy-oriented. He positioned himself not as a neutral journalist, but as a believer documenting the life of a man he considered a historic figure, capturing Lazar's daily life and his weary, unwavering conviction. The documentary served several crucial functions. It provided updated, high-quality interviews with Lazar, allowing a new generation to see and hear him directly, his story unchanged, but his face now etched with the lines of a man who had lived for 30 years under the weight of his own narrative. It also presented some new elements, including clearer scans of the controversial W-2 document and further discussions about the technical details of the sport model flying saucer he claimed to have worked on. It framed the story not as a cold case, but as an ongoing mystery with a living protagonist. A dramatic, unplanned event during filming injected startling new life into the narrative. An FBI raid on Lazar's scientific equipment business. Corbell's cameras captured the aftermath, Lazar surveying his ransacked office, expressing frustration and a sense of vindication that the government was still interested in him. While the FBI's stated reason involved the handling of restricted chemicals, the timing was, to supporters, highly suspicious. For the documentary and its audience, it was a stark, real-time demonstration that Lazar remained a person of intense interest to federal authorities, reinforcing his claims of ongoing harassment. The public and critical reception of the documentary highlighted the enduring divide. Within the UFO community and among general audiences on streaming platforms, it was a hit, reigniting debate and introducing Lazar to millions who were too young to remember the original controversy. Mainstream critics, however, largely dismissed it as one-sided advocacy, criticizing its lack of skeptical voices and its emotional, rather than forensic, approach. Yet, even this criticism fueled the conversation, proving the story's undiminished ability to generate controversy and clicks. The impact was magnified by its release on Netflix, which gave it a global, mainstream platform. Suddenly, people from Tokyo to Berlin were engaging with the specifics of Element 115 and S4. Podcasts dissected it, online forums buzzed, and Lazar's name trended on social media. The documentary achieved what decades of niche media could not. It made the Bob Lazar story a contemporary topic again, proving its narrative power was not dimmed by time, but had acquired the patina of a classic, enduring mystery. Corbell's film effectively bridged the generational gap. For older viewers, it was a nostalgia-tinged update. For younger viewers, it was a compelling introduction to a foundational UFO text. It demonstrated that in the age of streaming and podcasts, there was still a massive appetite for well-produced content about government secrecy and the possibility of extraterrestrial contact. The documentary didn't solve the mystery. It repackaged it for the 21st century and found an eager audience. 30 years later, the story was told again. And once again, the world listened. As the dust of decades settles around the story of Bob Lazar, what remains is not a resolution, but a constellation of enduring, unanswered questions that continue to flicker in the cultural consciousness. The central mystery persists. Did a physicist from Los Alamos work on reverse engineering alien craft in the Nevada desert? Or did a brilliant electronics technician construct the most compelling and costly UFO hoax in history? The camps remain divided, not by new evidence, but by the interpretation of the old evidence. The W-2, the Element 115 prediction, the unwavering testimony, and the missing credentials. What remains unresolved is everything of substance. We do not know if S4 exists. We do not know if the U.S. government possesses craft of non-human origin. We do not know if Lazar's migraines are the scars of exotic physics or the marks of profound stress. The story exists in a permanent state of potential, a quantum superposition where it is both true and false until observed by a definitive piece of evidence. Evidence that has never materialized and, given the nature of the claims, may never materialize for public scrutiny. This leads to the frustrating, yet fascinating, impossibility of definitive proof either way. For believers, the lack of disproof is meaningful. The government's silence and the pattern of harassment are seen as proof of guilt. For skeptics, the lack of proof is the whole point. The burden was never met. The story has achieved a kind of equilibrium. a stalemate between faith and skepticism where each side sees the other's arguments as missing the forest for the trees, or vice versa. Yet, the story refuses to die. It experiences periodic resurgences, a new documentary, a podcast series, a declassified memo that tangentially references advanced aerospace threats, a viral social media moment. Each time, it finds a new audience. This durability is its own kind of evidence, not of extraterrestrials, but of narrative power. The story taps into fundamental human drives: curiosity about the cosmos, distrust of power, and the allure of the hidden truth known only to a lone, brave individual. The reason the story endures is because it is, at its heart, a perfect myth for the modern age. It combines the authority of science with the thrill of conspiracy, the vastness of space with the specificity of a Nevada map coordinate. It offers a tantalizing what-if that is detailed enough to feel real, yet unverifiable enough to remain safe from final debunking. It lives in the fertile gap between what we know and what we suspect, a gap that human imagination is perpetually drawn to fill. Therefore, the legacy of Bob Lazar is not a closed case file, but an open invitation. It is an ongoing conversation about truth, secrecy, evidence, and belief. It challenges us to examine how we decide what is real, whom we trust, and why we are so captivated by the idea that our world is not what it seems. The figure at its center remains an enigma, a possible hero, a possible liar, or a possible something else entirely. The final chapter has not been written because the central questions refuse to be answered to everyone's satisfaction. The truth remains elusive, but the search for it continues, driven by one man's impossible story. Before reaching for conclusions, it is essential to establish the solid ground upon which the entire, swirling mystery of Bob Lazar rests. These are the verifiable facts, the data points that exist independent of interpretation and are documented by third parties. First, his employment history. Bob Lazar was employed as a contractor at Los Alamos National Laboratory in the early 1980s. This is confirmed by his listing in the laboratory's internal telephone directory, a document accessible to researchers and journalists. This fact places him within the high-security scientific community, he described. Second, the W-2 form. While its interpretation is debated, the document itself is a tangible artifact. It shows that in 1989, Robert Lazar was paid by an entity identified as the United States Department of Naval Intelligence under a specific employer identification number. Forensic analysis has not proven it a forgery, and the EIN has been validated. This document provides evidence of a financial relationship with a naval intelligence funding pool during the exact time frame of his alleged work at S-4, corroborating his claim of working for a secret government program. Third, the Wednesday night sightings. This phenomenon is supported by multiple, independent witnesses beyond Lazar himself. Friends like John Lear and Gene Huff, as well as subsequent groups of UFO watchers, have publicly testified for decades to seeing brilliant, maneuvering lights over the Papoose Range on a predictable weekly schedule in the late 1980s and early 1990s. This collective testimony confirms that something anomalous was occurring in that airspace at that time, an event that aligns perfectly with Lazar's claim of scheduled test flights. Fourth, the Element 115 prediction. This is a matter of public record. Bob Lazar spoke in detail about Element 115 as a stable, metallic fuel in 1989. The element moscovium, Element 115, was first synthesized by scientists in 2003. While the properties differ, the specific numerical prediction is an indisputable fact of the timeline. He identified an element that did not yet officially exist on the periodic table, and 14 years later, science created it. Fifth, the consistency of his testimony. This is a psychological and historical fact that can be observed by comparing interviews from 1989, 1990, 2018, and beyond. The core narrative, the facility name, the number of craft, the propulsion method, the fuel source, the test schedule, has remained unchanged for over 30 years across countless hours of questioning. This consistency is a measurable characteristic of his account. Presenting only what can be independently verified creates a surprisingly sturdy, if limited, framework. We know he worked at a top lab. We know he had a financial link to naval intelligence. We know anomalous lights were seen by others where and when he said they would be. We know he predicted an element later discovered. We know his story hasn't wavered. These are the pillars. They do not, by themselves, construct the edifice of his full claim, but they are its foundation. They are real, documented, and form the basis of all further debate. These facts are real. What they mean is still disputed. For all the verifiable facts, the heart of Bob Lazar's story resides in a realm beyond the reach of public verification. These are the great unknowns, the gaps that neither believer nor skeptic can definitively fill with incontrovertible evidence. The most significant is the S-4 facility itself. Despite decades of satellite imagery analysis and speculation, no publicly available evidence confirms the existence of a 9-hangar complex built into the base of the Papoose Range near Area 51. Its reality remains an article of faith or skepticism, not established fact. The alien craft and their technology constitute the grandest unprovable claim. There are no clear photographs, no material samples, no leaked schematics. The detailed descriptions of seamless hulls, gravity amplifiers, and Element 115 reactors exist solely as testimony. Their physical reality has never been demonstrated to the public. The technology, as described, operates on principles that defy or extend current physics, placing it in a category that is, by its very nature, currently untestable and unfalsifiable by open scientific inquiry. The absence of physical evidence is a conscious feature of the story from Lazar's perspective, explained by extreme security, but it remains an absence nonetheless. In a case of this magnitude, one might expect a single, blurry but convincing image, or a material fragment, to have surfaced from another source over 30 years. That it has not is a central feature of the mystery. It is the great void at the story's center. The mystery of Lazar's educational credentials at MIT and Caltech also remains unresolved. The absence of records is a fact. Lazar's explanation, a government erasure, is an unverifiable claim. We cannot prove the records were destroyed, just as skeptics cannot prove they never existed. We are left with two competing narratives about the past, neither of which can be conclusively proven with the evidence available to us. The truth of his education is locked in a past we cannot independently audit. The U.S. government's silence on the specifics of his claims is another known unknown. This silence is a fact, but its meaning is not. It could be the silence of an entity with nothing to say about a fabrication, or it could be the silence of an entity guarding a profound secret. The official neither confirm nor deny stance is strategically ambiguous. It proves nothing about the truth or falsehood of Lazar's story, only that the government does not wish to engage with it on the record. This leads us to the epistemological limits of the entire case. We have reached the boundary of what can be known from outside the veil of classification. The available evidence creates a compelling pattern but falls short of proof. The lack of evidence does not disprove the story, but it fails to substantiate its most extraordinary elements. We are left in a state of uncertainty, forced to make a judgment based on interpretation, intuition, and the weight we assign to circumstantial patterns. It is a lesson in humility about the limits of knowledge when confronting potential state secrets. Absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence, but it isn't evidence of presence either. For those who find Bob Lazar credible, the case is not built on a single piece of irrefutable evidence, but on the compelling convergence of multiple lines of argument. Synthesizing the supporting evidence creates a portrait that, to believers, points overwhelmingly toward truth-telling. The starting point is the documented facts, his placement at Los Alamos and the W.2 prove he was in the world of high-security science and intelligence funding. These aren't mistakes. They are foundational pieces that align perfectly with his narrative of being recruited from that milieu for a deeper black project. The argument for government erasure and harassment follows logically. From the believer's perspective, the missing educational records are not an accident, but the predicted outcome. If his story is true, discrediting him would be the first priority. The subsequent legal troubles, the prostitution arrest with its suspicious timing, and the reports of surveillance fit the established pattern of character assassination used against other national security whistleblowers. The FBI raid during the documentary filming is seen not as a coincidence, but as a continuation of this pattern of pressure, confirming he remains a person of active interest. The consistency and staggering detail of his account over 3 decades are powerful psychological evidence. A fabricated story of this complexity would be extraordinarily difficult to maintain without contradiction under relentless scrutiny. His ability to recall specific technical details, facility layouts, and procedures with precision across decades suggests the recollection of real, lived experience, not a rehearsed fiction. The calm, matter-of-fact demeanor with which he delivers this incredible story further lends it an air of authenticity, devoid of the theatricality often found in hoaxes. The lack of a clear profit or fame motive is a critical piece of the believer's calculus. Lazar gained nothing but trouble. He lost his career, his privacy, and his peace of mind. He did not become wealthy from books or speaking tours. This self-destructive trajectory is inconsistent with a calculated hoax, but perfectly consistent with the painful path of a whistleblower acting out of a tortured conscience or a compelled need to reveal what he perceived as a monumental truth. The corroborating witnesses and circumstantial evidence add layers of support. The independent accounts of the Wednesday night lights transform a claim into a witnessed event. The Element 115 prediction is viewed not as a lucky guess, but as prescient knowledge that could only come from exposure to advanced science. The broader context of real, historical black programs and the massive, unaccountable black budget provide a plausible ecosystem in which a program like S4 could not only exist but thrive in complete secrecy. When all these elements are weighed together, the verified footholds in reality, the pattern of official pushback, the unwavering testimony, the absence of personal gain, and the corroborating details, the believer's case coalesces into a coherent, if unproven, whole. It argues that the simplest explanation for the entire pattern of facts is that Bob Lazar is telling the essential truth about his experiences. It requires accepting that governments can and do keep world-shattering secrets, and that individuals can be caught in the gears of that machinery. If you weigh the evidence honestly, belief becomes reasonable. The skeptical position on Bob Lazar is not one of mere dismissal, but of a rigorous demand for evidence commensurate with the claim. Synthesizing the contrary evidence creates a coherent alternative narrative, that of an intelligent, technically skilled individual who constructed a brilliant, enduring myth. The foundation of this case is the irreconcilable problem of his education. The complete absence of records from MIT and Caltech, despite exhaustive searches, strongly indicates he never attended. His explanation of a government erasure, while narratively convenient, requires belief in an operation of unprecedented, flawless scope against 2 of the world's most independent institutions, an extraordinary claim in itself, lacking evidence. The scientific inconsistencies within his story provide further grounds for doubt. While his technical language sounds convincing, physicists point out fundamental problems. The stable, workable element 115 he describes does not match the unstable milliseconds-long moscovium created in labs. His description of generating and amplifying gravity waves for propulsion conflates concepts from general relativity in ways that are not scientifically coherent. These are not minor quibbles, but errors in foundational principles that a physicist working on such technology would be unlikely to make. They suggest the knowledge of an enthusiastic autodidact, not a formally trained insider. The complete absence of physical proof is the skeptic's most powerful tool. After 30 years, there is not a single piece of hardware, a clear photograph, or a corroborating document from inside S4. In an age where leaks are commonplace, the total silence from any other insider is statistically curious. The consistent retreat to security prevented it makes the story unfalsifiable, a classic feature of pseudoscientific claims. The burden of proof rests on the claimant, and for a claim this monumental, that burden has not been met. Character questions and legal troubles, while not directly disproving his UFO claims, provide a motive and context for fabrication. The prostitution-related arrest and financial struggles paint a picture of a man under pressure. A skeptic might argue that a dramatic, attention-grabbing story could be a way to rebuild a damaged reputation or financial standing. A Hail Mary past that, against all odds, found an enduring audience. While not proof of lying, it establishes a background against which a hoax becomes more psychologically plausible. Alternative explanations for his knowledge are readily available. His demonstrable skills in electronics and propulsion could have been gained through hands-on experience and avid reading, not a black program. The element 115 prediction could be a remarkably lucky guess based on following fringe scientific literature about the island of stability. The W2 could be from a more mundane classified project. The Wednesday night lights could have been sightings of other, terrestrial black projects, like early stealth drones, which he then misinterpreted or deliberately mythologized. Ultimately, the skeptic's case rests on the principle of parsimony, the simplest explanation that fits the facts. The simplest explanation is that a talented storyteller with a background in electronics and a fascination with UFOs and fringe physics wove together a compelling narrative from real but mundane elements. His Los Alamos work, a naval intelligence paycheck, current rumors, and scientific speculation. This explains the verifiable facts while not requiring belief in a cosmic conspiracy kept perfectly secret. The story is extraordinary. The evidence provided is, at best, ordinary and circumstantial. If extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, the evidence isn't there. The story of Bob Lazar, in its unresolved state, offers us a rare gift in the modern age, a genuine mystery. We live in an era that often demands immediate answers, binary truths, and definitive closure. This story refuses to provide any of that. Instead, it invites us to sit with uncertainty, to hold two contradictory possibilities in our minds simultaneously, and to find a kind of peace in not knowing. There is value in this unsolved state, a space where curiosity remains alive and imagination is free to explore. This tension speaks to a deep human conflict, our need for certainty versus our ability to find comfort in ambiguity. We crave to know whether we are alone in the universe, whether our governments are honest, whether a single man can be trusted. The Lazar story denies us these satisfactions. In doing so, it becomes a mirror reflecting our own relationship with the unknown. Do we fill the void with belief, with skepticism, or can we simply let the question hang, beautiful and unanswered, in the air like the desert stars? It is entirely possible, even likely, that we may never know the definitive truth. The relevant files may remain classified for another century, or they may not exist at all. The key witnesses will pass away, and the desert will keep its secrets. This potential for permanent unknowability is not a failure, but a feature of the mystery. It transforms the story from a puzzle to be solved into a timeless narrative to be contemplated, a modern myth whose power lies in its irresolvability. The mystery itself has immense value. It drives inquiry, fuels debate, and inspires art and investigation. It keeps us looking up at the night sky and questioning the nature of authority. The enduring fascination with Lazar's story is a testament to our collective hunger for wonder, for the possibility that reality is stranger and more magical than it appears in our daily routines. The mystery is the engine of that wonder. Regardless of its ultimate truth, the story teaches us profound lessons. It teaches us about the immense power of state secrecy and the fragility of individual credibility against it. It teaches us about the psychology of belief and the standards of evidence. It shows how a single narrative can reshape culture, tourism, and even our language. These are real impacts, born from an unverified tale. In a way, the cultural truth of the story, its influence, has become more demonstrable than its factual truth. Embracing this uncertainty is an act of intellectual maturity. It allows us to engage with the story not as a battle to be won, but as a landscape to be explored, full of fascinating contours and hidden caves. We can examine the evidence, listen to the arguments, and then rest in the understanding that some questions are grander than their answers. The search itself is the point. Perhaps the answer doesn't matter as much as the questions we ask along the way. Beyond the debate over alien technology, the Bob Lazar saga holds up a mirror to much larger, more profound questions about our society. It is, at its core, a story about the relationship between secrecy and democracy. How much secrecy is necessary for national security, and at what point does it become a threat to the informed consent of the governed? When a government can deny the existence of a place like Area 51 for 60 years, what other truths might it be capable of withholding? Lazar's story forces us to confront the uncomfortable reality that we live in a system where vast domains of knowledge and activity are permanently walled off from public view, funded by our taxes, but not subject to our scrutiny. This leads to fundamental questions about the relationship between citizens and their government in the 21st century. What do we deserve to know? Do we have a right to knowledge that redefines our understanding of reality and our place in the cosmos, even if that knowledge is destabilizing? Lazar acted on the belief that we do. His critics, and the state, operate on the belief that such knowledge must be controlled. This conflict between the right to know and the need to protect is a central tension of our time, played out in microcosm around one man's testimony. The story also probes our readiness for certain truths. If non-human intelligence is real and its technology is in human hands, are we prepared for that revelation? What would it do to our religions, our sciences, our global politics? The very idea that such a truth might be too dangerous to reveal is a recurring theme in UFO lore, and Lazar's narrative is built upon it. This forces us to ask, who gets to decide what humanity is ready for? A classified committee or humanity itself? On a personal level, the story is a deep exploration of the nature of belief and evidence. How do we decide what is real? Do we trust institutions or individuals? Do we value documentary proof or personal testimony? The divided reaction to Lazar is a perfect case study in how people process the same information through different filters of trust, worldview, and experience. It reveals that truth is often not an objective discovery, but a subjective construction. Ultimately, Bob Lazar's story is a vessel for our own hopes, fears, and curiosities. For some, it's a story of heroic truth-telling. For others, it's a cautionary tale about gullibility. For everyone, it's an invitation to look beyond the mundane and consider the possibilities that linger at the edges of our understanding. The lights over the Nevada desert, whether they are alien craft or Black Project aircraft, are a symbol of that lingering mystery, a reminder that there are still frontiers, not just in space, but in truth itself. Bob Lazar broke his oath of secrecy, What happened next destroyed his life, sparked a cultural phenomenon, and left us with a mystery that endures to this day. Whether he's a hero or a fraud, a whistleblower or a fabulist, one thing is certain. His story forced us to ask questions we weren't supposed to ask. And in those questions, perhaps, lies the real truth. Not about aliens, but about ourselves, our government, and the secrets we're willing to accept. The lights still fly over Nevada. The truth still hides in the desert.